Progeny of combat, what do you mean by this?
Recognizing who the other party was, Ren's face twitched. Taking a deep breath to calm himself down, he said,
Remember that everything you have now was given to you by the Master Teacher Pavilion. As long as we will it so, the Master Teacher Pavilion can take away everything that you have any time we wish.
Take away everything I have. Completely unfazed by what Ren had said, Seth waved his hand nonchalantly and replied, Do whatever pleases you. After which, he descended toward Xavier.
Progeny of combat, Seth! Just what kind of attitude do you think you're showing us?
Unable to tolerate the young man's unconcerned reaction, Elder Clay dashed forward and blocked his path. Even though he had been poisoned by Gia earlier, as a 9-star master teacher, he had a deep understanding of medicine, and on top of that, he was also a powerful cultivator himself. After recuperating for a moment, he'd already recovered enough to move around without any trouble. Don't block my way. Seth glanced at the elder standing before him with narrowed eyes.
Graham, audacious! Is this how you address a 9-star master teacher?
The infuriated Elder Clay snapped as his face turned crimson with rage. Every single one of Xavier's students was more arrogant than the last.
Then how do you want me to address you, huh? Shall I kneel to you?
Seth scoffed.
You do not have to kneel to me, but you should understand that the strength and influence you possess right now is all due to the credit of the Master Teacher Pavilion. You are indebted to us. Do not bite the hand that feeds you and ruin your own future for... But halfway through Elder Clay's words, he suddenly felt goosebumps on his arms. The next instant, he saw a spear piercing right in his direction, and the powerful aura that it commanded seemed as if it would tear his primordial spirit to shreds.
You! Alarmed, Elder Clay quickly whipped out a sword to defend against the spears. As the tip of the spear and the sword collided with a metallic clang, Elder Clay felt overwhelming might surge up his arm, seemingly threatening to jolt his life energy paths into shreds. The sword flew out of his hands, and he spurted a mouthful of blood as he was forced back a couple of steps. But before he could regain his footing, he saw the body of the spear flicking forcefully in his direction. He instinctively cowered in fear, and he hurriedly raised his palms to defend himself. Under the astounding might of the spear whip, Elder Clay's body slammed right into the ground, creating a huge pit beneath him on impact.
I'm already sparing your pride, but you still want to lecture me.
Seth scoffed as he clapped the dust off his hands and pulled back his spear leisurely.
Elder Clay! Progeny of combat, just what in the world do you think you're doing?
Not expecting the other party to send Elder Clay flying without hesitation, the surrounding master teachers flew into an uproar. They rushed forward to surround Seth.
Are you all thinking of making a move on me?
Despite the precarious situation that he was in, Seth didn't show the slightest hint of anxiety. Instead, he lifted his gaze and bellowed,
These people are thinking of killing your progeny of combat. If you don't wish to be without a hallmaster, stop them.
Right after those words were spoken, the master teachers saw the scene before them blurring. The surrounding space distorted for a moment before revealing 8 elders. Each emanated an aura of bloodshed, reminiscent of valiant warriors who had just walked out of a battlefield. The 8 elders drew their swords simultaneously, and a massive spatial rift created a gap between the master teachers and them. One of the 8 elders swept his gaze across the master teachers before saying in a firm voice,
I'll have to ask you all not to advance any further than this. It wasn't easy for the Combat Master Hall to find a progeny of combat, and we don't wish for anything to go wrong at this point.
Hearing the words of the elder, Ren felt blood rushing into his head as he roared,
Preposterous! This is utterly preposterous! Are you all starting a mutiny here?
Ever since the founding of the Master Teacher Pavilion many millennia ago, it had always taken the role of the leader of mankind, standing in a position that commanded respect and deference from the masses. There had never been a single power who dared oppose them. Yet, in the course of a single day, 4 powers had raised their arms against them.
Mutiny! Just like how water can float a boat, it can also devour it whole as well. If the Master Teacher Pavilion is just
and impartial, no one will question its judgment. But if it has strayed from the principles that it embraced, it'll find many standing up to oppose it. Seth replied coldly before turning his attention away from the master teachers altogether. He descended to the ground and kneeled on the floor. Disciple Seth pays respect to teacher. Xavier looked at his student from head to toe and nodded with a warm smile. Get up. Over the past few months, Seth had grown far more than he had expected, reaching a level that even he could hardly see through. Teacher, I heard that the Master Teacher Pavilions issued an arrest warrant on you due to the Matthews clan reporting that you've utilized an artifact of the otherworldly demonic tribe. Seth stood up and asked respectfully, May I know if that's true? After pondering for a moment, Xavier nodded. That seems to be the case. To be honest, he wasn't too sure why the Master Teacher Pavilion had chosen to release an arrest warrant on him, but the cause should be tied to the incident that had happened back at the Matthews clan. Back then, he'd been in a rush to save Sarah, so he ended up borrowing Vicious's strength to deal with Jeremy. That could be the reason the Master Teacher Pavilion had ended up taking such a severe stance against him. After all, the Master Teacher Pavilion had always been wary of the otherworldly demonic tribe, and when the security of mankind was at stake, it was understandable that they would rather be safe than sorry. Teacher, you have fought against the otherworldly demonic tribe and single-handedly destroyed an entire otherworldly demon emperor's lineage. Yet due to an inkling of doubt that has yet to be verified, the Matthews clan insisted that you're guilty and demanded your punishment. Years of holding on to their title as the #1 Sage Clan Shores inflated their ego. They seem to think that they can do as they please without facing consequences. Seth sneered coldly before clasping his fist and bowing grandly to Xavier. Teacher, please allow me to vent your anger for you. You want to help me get back at them? Knowing Seth's hot temper, Xavier sighed deeply before nodding. Don't take anyone's life. It'll do just to teach them a lesson. I understand, teacher. Nodding, Seth slammed the spear in his hand onto the ground, causing the ground to tremble. He turned his gaze upward and scanned the crowd above before saying, Gia, Lars, the Matthews clan, the Sanctum of Sages, and the Glacier Plain Court have framed our teacher and attempted to take his life. Are you willing to help me exact vengeance for him and bring honor and dignity back to his name? Of course. Gia took a step forward. It's my responsibility to do so, Lars replied as he walked forward as well. Good, Seth replied heartily. He directed a cold and severe glare toward an old man amid the crowd above and bellowed, Jeremy Matthews, not only have you injured my teacher, you even issued an order to have him surrounded and killed. For the humiliation that you have caused him, I, Seth, challenge you to a duel in the stead of my teacher. Do you dare accept my duel? Seth flicked his spear to the side, and spatial ripples appeared along the movement of it. You are challenging me to a fight. Not expecting a young lad who wasn't even in his 20s yet to dare challenge him to a duel, Jeremy sneered in disdain. Very well. Come. But before Jeremy could finish his sentence, a piercing shrill like a sharp blast of wind suddenly echoed from above. He quickly raised his head, only to see a massive figure falling from the sky, heading right in his direction. Before he could even react, a massive bottom had already slammed him down into the ground, causing several of his ribs to fracture. A huge number of his teeth scattered all over the ground as he coughed up mouthful after mouthful of blood. Seniors and juniors, how can you leave me out for a gathering like this? Seems like I've arrived late to the party. The owner of the massive bottom said with a bright smile, revealing his gleaming white teeth. Seeing the familiar face of the figure sitting on top of Jeremy, Seth replied with a hearty chuckle, You came at the perfect time. With his eye of discernment, he could tell that Alan was far from a match for Jeremy. However, it seemed like while the rest of them had been protecting their teacher from the master teachers, this junior of his hadn't been slacking. He had flown to the highest altitude possible given the limits of his strength, likely tens of thousands of feet up in the sky, and he had dove all the way down from that height toward them. By the time Alan reached them, the speed of his fall had already reached several times the speed of sound. As the attack had come too quickly from an unexpected angle, not to mention that his attention had been captured by Seth, Jeremy had been caught off guard by the attack from above. This brief lapse in attention had been more than enough for the swiftly plummeting Alan to get him. The impact of the fall from someone who had been accelerating furiously for tens of thousands of feet was not to be underestimated. While it wasn't enough to kill Jeremy, it had inflicted grievous injuries that would incapacitate him for some time. Who could have thought that the first elder of the Matthews clan, one of the top experts in the world, would actually end up incapacitated by someone's bottom before he could even use his bloodline ability? This would really be a huge smirch on his reputation.
Oh, well, that's a relief.
Alan patted his bottom before getting to his feet. Then, as if suddenly realizing that someone was beneath him, he turned around and exclaimed with an exaggeratedly shocked expression,
"Oh, Elder Jeremy, what are you doing under me? You..."
Seeing the innocent look on the fellow who had nearly crushed him to death, Jeremy spurted another mouthful of blood.
"Elder Jeremy, our Price clan's always been on close terms with the Matthews clan, and we've never crossed one another before. Why would you appear beneath my ass of all places? Quick, come out. I'll heal you up right now."
With an anxious look on his face, Alan stretched his hand forward to grab Jeremy's head, and as if pulling a radish out from the earth, he plucked him out from the hole he was in. Feeling as if his neck was on the verge of snapping, the first elder spurted another mouthful of blood. The sheer embarrassment from the situation made his eyes red in anger, and he was on the verge of erupting. He was the most authoritative individual in the Matthews clan other than the clan head. How could he tolerate being humiliated by a brat so much younger than him? In a state of rage, Jeremy was just about to drive his gleam to teach him a lesson when Alan suddenly turned to Xavier and said,
"Teacher, it seems like the first elder's injuries are really quite severe. I remember that you have a pummeling healing therapy technique. Can I ask you to impart it to me so that I can treat him to make up for my mistake?" "Pummeling healing therapy technique."
Hearing those words, Jeremy nearly choked. Just that bottom landing on him had nearly knocked him out. If the other party pummeled him on top of that,
"Is this how you treat an elder from a clan that's close to your Price clan?"
he thought anxiously. Alan, your memory's really failing you. That skill's called the beast-taming pummeling technique, not the pummeling healing therapy technique. No matter how formidable a saint beast it was, as long as our teacher gave it a good beating, it would submit to him obediently. Seth kindly reminded him from the side.
"Oh, yeah, you're right. It's the beast-taming pummeling technique. How did I remember it incorrectly? My apologies. But back to the topic at hand, I came out in such a hurry that I forgot to bring any recovery medicine with me."
Alan turned his sight to the young woman not too far away and asked,
"Gia, do you have any good ointment or the sort that you could lend me? You poison masters often concoct all sorts of stuff, so you should have quite a few with you, right?"
"I do have quite a few incredible pills with me. Within 10 breaths after consumption, the patient will be permanently relieved from all pain and suffering,"
Gia replied with a sweet smile as she passed a jade bottle over.
"Oh, you're really my savior, Gia. I can tell that it's an incredible medicine with just a glance. Elder Jeremy, I really didn't do it on purpose earlier. Elder Jeremy? Don't run away. I haven't trained you yet."
After grabbing the jade bottle, Alan intended to feed the pill to the first elder when he found that the fellow whom he had just plucked from the ground had already fled far away with a frenzied look on his face. If not for the fact that he was severely injured, he would have torn Alan apart right then and there.
"What a pity. You do know this is really good medicine, don't you? You sure don't know how to appreciate good stuff."
Alan grumbled with a look of pity on his face. Shaking his head, he turned to Seth and asked,
"Well, since I'm not late, whom shall I face?"
"You can just sit by the side and enjoy the show. That woman is mine to deal with."
With an imposing wave of her hand, Gia directed a piercing gaze at the first elder of the Glacier Plain court and said,
Elder June, you framed my teacher and incited the Master Teacher Pavilion to issue an arrest warrant on him. I officially challenge you to a duel right now. Since you have the guts to harm my teacher, I believe that you should have the guts to face me in a battle too, right? You.
June's face paled. She had already witnessed the young woman's prowess earlier, and her poison art was truly indomitable. June had confidence in her own strength, but she wasn't so arrogant to think that she would be a match for someone who could poison even a 9-star master teacher to death with ease.
What? Getting scared now?
Gia scoffed in disdain before turning her sights to Master Henry.
What about you, then?
Master Henry's lips twitched, but he didn't dare reply to Gia's provocation. He was only at Saint Level 9 primary stage, a long way off from matching up to Elder Clay and the others. If the young woman really made a move on him, he would probably be defeated in a heartbeat.
Oh, very well. I won't take advantage of you all.
Gia flung her sleeves and declared majestically,
Your Glacier Plain Court and Sanctum of Sages can rally all of your experts together. I will face them all at once.
Unable to take the provocations anymore, June bellowed,
Oh, Mr. Gia, do not take this too far. You are saying that I am going too far. When you brought out so many people to encircle my teacher, did you ever consider that you were taking it too far? Whether you like it or not, none of you will be getting away from here unscathed.
Gia harumphed coldly as she dashed right for June. Before she even arrived, her poison aura had already scattered into the surroundings in the form of a pink mist.
Don't think that I will be scared of you. Your poison art might be formidable, but I will not allow you to humiliate me that easily.
Knowing that there was no way out of this, June bellowed furiously as she thrust a finger forth. The surrounding temperature suddenly plunged along with her movement, and it almost felt as if everything within a radius of 10 miles would be frozen. She knew that Gia would be a powerful adversary, so she had no intention of holding back at all. She drove her pure feminine energy to its very limits and released it all at once.
Seems like you can at least put up a fight,
Gia scoffed. Without paying any heed to the chilling energy that June was emanating, she continued dashing forward. When she was only 600 feet from the ladder, she suddenly raised her hand and clenched it. A light yellow shockwave burst forth, and when June's chilling energy came into contact with it, it was forcefully pushed back before abruptly sinking back into the ground.
What a formidable poison art that is!
The surrounding crowd felt a numbing sensation on their scalps. To be able to render even one's gleam immobile, the reputation of the innate poison body truly wasn't unfounded.
Wow. These children have really grown up.
Xavier nodded with a heartened smile. The previous time that his students had helped him exact vengeance was back when they were still in the Olmec Kingdom. It had taken every single one of them to collaborate with one another before they'd been able to defeat August. But now, they had all grown into powerhouses that could fight toe-to-toe with even the Master Teacher Pavilion headquarters. The rate that they had changed at left him feeling a mixture of happiness and nostalgia.
At least it seems like the effort I devoted toward them wasn't wasted,
Xavier remarked. As a teacher, there was probably no happier occasion than seeing one's student maturing. At that moment, it felt as if all the hard work that he had put in was worthwhile. All of a sudden, Xavier's eyebrows shot up. He flicked his wrist, and a seal appeared in the middle of his palm. The seal was trembling excitedly, such that it felt searing to Xavier. Xavier frowned doubtfully. It didn't take in my blood, and I'm unable to delve my consciousness into it as well. Why would it suddenly grow so hot? Previously, he'd been thinking of all sorts of ways in order to tame the seal, but no matter what he did, there was no response at all. Why would it suddenly grow so hot after being placed inside his storage ring? It was the greatest treasure of the Master Teacher Pavilion, and it had been snatched away by Lars so that Ren couldn't use it to deal with them. No matter how the matter was resolved, he would likely have to return it in the end. If the seal was ruined in his hands, it might really result in a full-blown war with the Master Teacher Pavilion. While it might seem that his direct disciples had managed to one-up the Master Teacher Pavilion, the unfortunate truth was that they still came nowhere close to matching it. For countless years, the Master Teacher Pavilion had been the de facto leader of the entire Master Teacher continent, and, given its accumulation and influence, the few of them there would still be far from sufficient to oppose it. Xavier pondered for a moment before a thought came to his mind. Since placing it in my storage ring, it's been completely silent. It was only when I was thinking of my student's growth that it suddenly grew warm. Well, could it be that the Pavilion Master Seal isn't tamed through blood, but through the virtues of a teacher? Well, if that's the case, it should be easier for me to tame it if I use the Celestial Master Teacher aura, right? The Celestial Master Teacher was an individual who was recognized by the heavens, such that even Master K dared not pull his weight before one. If the token was really related to the virtues of a teacher, who would be more qualified than a teacher recognized by the heavens? Let me give it a try. With this thought in mind, he discreetly drove his Celestial Master Teacher aura and infused it into the token. Due to the increment of his soul depth, he commanded greater control over his aura compared to before. Through careful manipulation, he was able to limit the emanation of his Celestial Master Teacher aura just to the area in contact with the Pavilion Master Seal, thus making it nearly impossible for any 9-star Master Teacher or even Master K to detect it. As soon as the aura came into contact with the Pavilion Master Seal, the latter immediately became even hotter. There was an abrupt burst of wind, and Xavier suddenly felt the weight in his hand disappearing entirely. He hurriedly lowered his gaze, and it was indeed the worst-case scenario. The Pavilion Master Seal had vanished without a trace. In an instant, goosebumps rose all over Xavier's body, and his vision turned dark as he nearly fainted. He quickly released his spiritual perception and scanned his surroundings, but it was completely empty. There was no sign of the token anywhere at all. It's over. Xavier nearly burst into tears. The Pavilion Master Seal was supposed to be some ancient sage artifact forged using Keith Cole's blood essence, and even Master K would have trouble dealing with it. Yet, why would it suddenly disappear after he grasped it for a moment like a melting ice cube? Just by its name alone, the Pavilion Master Seal, even a fool could figure out its deep significance to the Master Teacher Pavilion. Even when Lars took it, while Ren did panic, he could tell that it was out of apprehension that the Master Teacher Pavilion would be humiliated rather than worry of never getting it back. But now that the Pavilion Master Seal had disappeared into thin air, how was he supposed to return it to the other party? While he did cause a huge fuss with the 3 powers, it was still something that could be resolved eventually. However, if he took away the Pavilion Master Seal as well, he would really be eaten alive.
Hurry up and come out! Stop messing around!
Xavier muttered anxiously as he searched his surroundings frantically. Soon, his eyes fell on his palm, and he froze. He found that 3 conspicuous crimson droplet imprints had unknowingly appeared on his palm, and it felt like they harnessed some kind of mysterious power. What is this? Xavier wondered as he tapped on one of the crimson droplets lightly. All of a sudden, with a resounding buzz amid a slight moment of disorientation, Xavier suddenly found himself being teleported into a void dimension. In this dimension, the concepts of time and space didn't seem to exist. All that could be seen around him was a glaring white background and a smiling elder. Xavier jolted in astonishment upon seeing the elder's face. There was no way he couldn't recognize the other party when his sculpture could be found in every single Master Teacher Pavilion across the continent. Keith Cole? At that moment, Keith Cole had a gentle and warm look on his face. A hint of agitation could be seen in the depths of his eyes as he said, "Finally, after so many years, pleased to meet you, the new Celestial Master Teacher." Junior Xavier pays respect to Keith Cole. Xavier clasped his fist and greeted the elder before him. Keith Cole stroked his beard and nodded with a kind smile, acknowledging Xavier's greeting. "The Pavilion Master Seal is an artifact that I forged with 3 droplets of my blood essence after founding the Master Teacher Pavilion. Only a true Celestial Master Teacher will be able to tame it. The fact that you can activate the seal and summon my will proves that you have met this condition, and..." Seeing that Keith Cole was about to jump into his usual long speech, Xavier stopped him anxiously. "Keith Cole, pardon me for saying this, but would you allow me to speak first? There's something urgent that I have to ask you." From past experience, he had come to learn that despite Keith Cole's great achievements, he was a particularly unreliable person. Each and every time that he managed to speak to Keith Cole, the other party would vanish right before getting to the main point. If he allowed Keith Cole to go first this time, chances were that the same would happen. Having learned his lesson, Xavier was determined to go first this time around. "Oh." Noting Xavier's anxiety, Keith Cole looked at the young man for a moment before raising his hand. "Please, feel free to speak." "I'm afflicted with the innate fetal poison, and I heard that you underwent the same experience back then as well. May I know how you managed to resolve it?" Xavier asked anxiously. "Innate fetal poison?" Keith Cole frowned as he examined Xavier intently. A moment later, he nodded and said, "It is indeed the innate fetal poison. Oh, the poison itself isn't too difficult to cure. But the thing that's hidden inside your innate fetal poison might not be that easy to get rid of," Keith Cole said with a grim look on his face. "The thing that's hidden inside the innate fetal poison? What's that?" Xavier asked in confusion. He had noticed the innate fetal poison early, and he used his Heaven's Path Gleam to have it suppressed into a corner, rendering it immobile. But from Keith Cole's tone, it seemed like there was more to the innate fetal poison than met the eye. "There's no point talking about it now. You'll come to know of it yourself once you cure yourself of the innate fetal poison. It's not that I want to conceal this matter from you, but there could be adverse consequences if I tell you in advance, so I can only seek your understanding for that. For the time being, let me tell you the method to resolving the innate fetal poison first," Keith Cole said. "Please, enlighten me." Xavier clasped his fist. While he still had some years before the triggering of the innate fetal poison, he still hoped to cure himself of it as soon as possible. Otherwise, he would be unable to shake off the tension coming from the feeling that he was already standing in death's grip. The innate fetal poison is planted into the body of an expecting mother in order to strip a fetus's bloodline or to destroy its vitality. As the poison is planted during a fetus's developmental phase, it is viewed to be an inherent condition by the body, so ordinary medicines are ineffective on it. There is only one way I know of to resolve it for good, and that is to become a 9-star Master Teacher and undergo the tribulation of heavenly flames. If you can draw the flames into your body and use the heat to sear the poison aura, you will be able to resolve the poison easily. Of course, the heavenly flames are a violent and dangerous power to deal with, and the slightest bit of carelessness can result in one being reduced to ash. I had to pay quite a heavy price in order to resolve my innate fetal poison back then," Keith Cole explained. "Tribulation of heavenly flames. Got it. Thank you, Keith Cole." Xavier clasped his fists once more. Given that these words had come from Keith Cole himself, the tribulation of heavenly flames should be effective. With this, he finally had a concrete direction to work toward. Given his current strength, he would still have some way to go before becoming a 9-star Master Teacher. Nevertheless, with his rate of cultivation, It wouldn't be too difficult for him to get there before 30. The innate fetal poison only triggers after stepping into your 30s, but still it would be best for you to resolve it as soon as possible. You've just reached your 20s not too long ago, and if you can resolve it before 25, you can avoid having your strength and potential compromised by it. Keith Cole warned grimly. Xavier nodded. I understand. Indeed, this matter should be resolved as soon as possible. After wrapping up the current mess that he was in, he should put his attention solely into raising his cultivation and strive for a breakthrough to 9-star Master Teacher within 2 months. Once he succeeded, everything would swiftly fall into place. Now that we have resolved your problem, I would like to talk to you about the Pavilion Master Seal. This artifact is forged using 3 droplets of my blood essence, and once you tame it, it will assume the form of droplets on your palm. By touching them, you will be able to... Keith Cole's figure suddenly flickered. We'll be able to... Xavier's heart skipped a beat upon seeing this sight, and he hurriedly urged Keith Cole to finish his sentence. Able to... Reaching his limit, Keith Cole's silhouette dissipated into thin air. Xavier's mind jolted, and he found himself still sitting right before Sarah. Up in the sky, Gia and June had barely begun their battle, and everyone was still where he remembered them to be. Nothing seemed to have changed at all. It was as if that conversation had occurred in frozen time. It was fortunate that this was the case, or else it could have ended in a disaster for Sarah. The fellow didn't finish his words again. Everyone says that he's the world's teacher, but who in the world disappears halfway through passing down important information? Xavier grumbled furiously beneath his breath. How many times had this happened? To think that the founder of the Master Teacher Pavilion, a figure respected by so many people, would actually be so unreliable. Forget it. Xavier glanced at the crimson droplets on his palm and murmured curiously. He mentioned something about touching them earlier. If I really touch them, what will happen? When he touched one previously, Keith Cole had popped up. Even if he touched one again, nothing bad would happen. Right? With such a thought in mind, Xavier tapped his finger on one of the crimson droplets once more. As soon as his finger came into contact with the crimson droplet, immense power suddenly began surging into his body, following which the crimson droplet that he touched began shrinking at a visible rate before vanishing without a trace. Xavier narrowed his eyes in astonishment at the changes in his body. His entire body was filled with power, and he felt as if he could command and destroy the world at his will. What strength is this? Xavier wondered in disbelief. He was a Saint Level 8 primary stage cultivator, but after taking in the power from the crimson droplet, he found himself far surpassing his limits, reaching a level far beyond his imagination. Even though he couldn't clearly assess how powerful he was at the moment, he could feel that he wielded enough power to crush the space around him with ease. Could this be what Ren said earlier about a level that's invincible among those beneath Ancient Sage? Previously, when Ren first took out the Pavilion Master Seal, he had said that those who were able to tame it would be able to command strength invincible among those beneath Ancient Sage. He had thought that the other party was simply exaggerating, but to think that it would be true. The crimson droplets in his palm seemed to be the blood essence that Keith Cole had infused into the Pavilion Master Seal, and by touching one, he would be able to take in the energy in the blood essence and command devastating power. However, this power ultimately still isn't mine, so there should be a time limit to it. Xavier concluded after some thought. As strong as this power was different from cultivation impartation. Rather than saying it had raised his cultivation, it was more like a cloak of power that he had donned temporarily. For a set amount of time, he would wield tremendous power. However, as time passed, that power would swiftly diminish, and once it had been depleted, he would return to how he originally was. 3 crimson droplets. That should mean I can use this ability 3 times. Having made sense of the matter, Xavier finally understood what Keith Cole wanted to say before disappearing. Most likely, Keith Cole was going to explain how the Pavilion Master Seal worked, but his unexpected question about the innate fetal poison resulted in him not having enough time to talk about the matter. No matter how powerful one was, as long as one successfully tamed the Pavilion Master Seal, one would have 3 opportunities to wield strength invincible beneath Ancient Sage. As expected of the world's teacher, the artifacts that he created were indeed on a whole new level. No matter what kind of mystical effects an artifact could have, nothing was safer than raw power. With this trump card in his possession, his safety would be assured. With such strength at my disposal, the Matthews clan, Glacier Plain Court, and the Sanctum of Sages won't pose a threat to me anymore, Xavier thought with a soft chuckle. He'd still been wondering how he should resolve the problem before him, but with such strength at his disposal, he had nothing to fear anymore. In the worst-case scenario, he would just have to force them all to submit to him. However, I still need to resolve the problem with Sarah's life energy paths first. As excited as Xavier was, he knew that his priority should be the tightly wrapped young woman before him. He continued to forge the pathways for Sarah's life energy paths, but in the midst of doing so, he realized that due to the rise in his strength, he was able to control his gleam more finely, allowing him to hasten the process significantly. Xavier heaved a sigh of relief. Should have taken at least 2 more hours, but with this I should be able to complete it within 10 minutes. While Xavier continued treating Sarah, the battle in the sky came to an end as well. June's face had turned completely black from poison, and her convulsing body plummeted to the ground. Be it in terms of poison art or even just raw power, she was far from a match for Gia. In fact, had it not been for Xavier instructing his students not to kill anyone, she would have already been dead by now. Seeing that her junior, Gia, had dealt with one of the culprits, Rose turned to Master Henry and said,
If I recall correctly, Master Henry, you issued an instruction to have my teacher arrested and killed as well, right? I reckon that you wouldn't like it if my other juniors, such as Seth and Gia, were to challenge you, so you won't turn down a fight from a spirit awakener like me, right?
Master Henry's face twitched in fright upon hearing those words. Considering how Seth and Gia were able to stand squarely against Ren, he would indeed stand no chance against those 2 monsters. However, the young woman in front of him wasn't a weakling either. She was the head of the Spirit Awakener Guild, and it would be foolish to underestimate the means that she had at her disposal.
If you're unwilling to fight, there is another way out of this. Apologize to my teacher now and retract your orders.
Rose harrumphed coldly with a fling of her sleeves. Apologize? That's impossible, Master Henry roared resolutely. Even if I die, I won't stand for anyone humiliating the Sanctum of Sages.
I see. I'll fulfill your wish for a valiant death, then.
Seeing that the other party's mind was set, Rose couldn't be bothered to waste her breath anymore. She raised her palm, and one of the Master Teacher Pavilions immediately charged toward Master Henry. A huge gale roared under the Master Teacher Pavilion's charge. The charge of something as colossal as an entire Master Teacher Pavilion was a rather imposing sight. Master Henry stood his ground and gathered his gleam to form a 30-foot large palm print, and he thrust it right into the charging Master Teacher Pavilion. The palm strike burst right through the Master Teacher Pavilion, causing it to collapse entirely. However, Master Henry was also forced to retreat under the impact as well.
Stop it! That is our Empire Alliance, Master Teacher Pavilion!
An 8-star Master Teacher yelled in despair by the side. I can't care that much at this point, Master Henry replied helplessly as he leaped forward and dashed for Rose. Kill a cavalry by shooting down its horse. Destroy a band of thieves by nabbing its leader. If the situation continued, it would only be a matter of time before he was worn down by the endless assault of buildings. In order to get out of this quandary, he would have to nab Rose first.
Did you really think that my strength only comes from my enchantments?
Rose scoffed as she looked at Master Henry's swiftly approaching figure. Unlike Seth and Gia, she hadn't met with any fortuitous encounters. nor did she possess a unique constitution. But, as the leader of the Spirit Awakener Guild, she had amassed the strength of her predecessors. She was no longer the naive and powerless girl of the past. She raised her hand and thrust her palm forward. Her movements weren't fast, but they carried fearsome might. In the midst of his charge, Master Henry suddenly felt a shudder run down his spine. Knowing that he wouldn't be able to withstand that attack head-on, he quickly leaped upward. But following his movement, he suddenly found his surroundings turning dark. Turning his gaze upward, he saw a massive puppet towering above him, swinging its fist toward him.
The guardian artifact of the Spirit Awakener Guild! Marion Puppet!
Ren bellowed in shock. Unfortunately, his warning came too late. There was no way that Master Henry could avoid the massive fist of the Empyrean puppet anymore. Once it struck him, even though he was a Saint Level 9 primary stage expert, he would be inflicted with severe injuries that would leave him incapacitated for months on end. At that crucial moment, a sharp, cold glint flashed across the sky, deflecting the puppet's fist, accompanied by an imposing voice.
Spit!
That sword energy was powerful and magnificent, carrying a wholesome intent to it. Even though it had come from afar, it didn't seem to be restricted by the concept of time. It seemed to have abruptly materialized right before the puppet's fist, thus saving Master Henry in the nick of time. That was a full might attack from the Empyrean puppet, yet it had easily been deflected by the other party.
An expert.
Rose narrowed her eyes warily. She hurriedly turned her gaze in the direction that the sword energy had originated from. At the same time, Seth also tightened his grip on his spear, prepared to make a move at any moment. To deflect Rose's attack from such a long distance away, that person's strength was at least on par with Ren's. In fact, in the field of swordsmanship, that person might have even surpassed Ren.
That was the speed sword quintessence.
Xavier, still in the midst of reconstructing Sarah's life energy paths, suddenly spoke up. With a nod, he answered the doubt in everyone's mind.
It's probably the head of the Matthews clan, the father of the young prodigy, the sword.
He had already learned the essence of the Matthews clan swordsmanship back in the Matthews clan, and he knew its capabilities very well. It was capable of allowing one's sword energy to break free from the restraints of time and reach one's opponent in an instant. However, the only one who could pull off such fine control of it, even from a long distance away, was the legendary head of the Matthews clan, the Sword.
I was intending to challenge him back when I was still at the Matthews clan, but he was nowhere to be seen. Since he's here, the good opportunity to see if he's really as strong as others make him out to be,
Xavier thought with a smile. During his trip to the Matthews clan, he had managed to make an appointment to duel with the Sword, but in the end, he didn't get to meet the other party. Who could have thought that they would come by one another here? Since that was the case, he could use the other party as a sparring partner to try out his newfound strength while exacting vengeance for Elder Clyde. More importantly, he would make it clear to the other party that if his son wanted to marry Eva, he would have to get past him first. Barely after those thoughts surfaced in his mind, the space ahead of him suddenly rippled, and two figures came into appearance, a middle-aged man and a middle-aged woman. They were the couple who had been going around in search of their son, the Sword and the Saint. Those two had been going in the opposite direction from the Empire Alliance when they received Master K's message and rushed over.
Godhead.
Upon seeing the two of them, Jeremy immediately rushed up to them in agitation as if he was looking at his saviors.
First Elder, what happened to you?
The Sword's eyebrows twitched in astonishment. As the #1 clan on the Master Teacher continent, even the Master Teacher Pavilion would have to tread carefully around the Matthews clan. Yet, for its first elder to be pummeled to such a state, not sparing any heed for the Matthews clan's dignity at all, just who could the culprit be?
It's all because of that damned Xavier and his students.
Jeremy spat as he pointed at the young lad below.
Tanhead, you must redress my grievances. Otherwise, what will others think of our Matthews clan? If we don't deal with this promptly,
would become the laughingstock of the Master-Teacher continent.
Xavier!
Upon hearing Jeremy's words, St. Lana immediately followed the First Elder's finger, and soon after, a young man gazing in her direction appeared in her field of vision. In that instant, her body began shuddering uncontrollably. St. Lana turned to her husband and exclaimed passionately through gleam telepathy,
"It must be him! I'm certain about it! It must be him!"
Even she had no idea why she was so certain that the young man before her was her son. She was aware that her claims were unfounded, but she had always trusted her intuition, and she could feel an inexplicable connection with him. Fearing that his wife might run amok, the sword hurriedly grabbed her hand and squeezed it.
"Calm down, darling. As long as he is our son, we'll surely be able to reunite with him today."
He had no idea what was going on, but given the fact that the First Elder could still be pummeled to such a state, despite the presence of so many 9-star Master Teachers, it would appear that Xavier was no ordinary figure. It was one thing if the other party was really their son, but if he wasn't their son and they still rushed over to acknowledge him, that would really make things awkward. In the first place, it was already a huge embarrassment for the Matthews clan to be forced into such a position. If they made a mistake at this point, the Matthews clan's reputation might really be lost for good. Seeing right through her husband's concerns, St. Lana bellowed telepathically with gritted teeth.
"Are you doubting my words? There's no way I would fail to recognize my own son! Even if he's matured, my blood still flows in his veins!"
"Dear, I know what you're feeling. As much as he's your son, he is mine as well. You are anxious to reunite with him, but so am I. However, it is precisely at a time like this that we must remain calm and ensure nothing goes wrong. There is a scarlet birthmark on our child's rear. I will find an excuse to ask about it later on, and as long as we can verify that, we will reunite with him right away. All right?"
The sword said. Even though their son was a connate saint, that didn't change the fact that he'd only been an infant when he left their side. Furthermore, the other party seemed to have a slightly different soul aura from their son, which made it more important to verify the matter. And the easiest and least intrusive method to do so was through his birthmark. All parts of a person's body could change over time, but one's birthmarks would never disappear.
"Very well."
Knowing that there was some sense in what the sword was saying, St. Lana nodded and composed herself. Seeing how the couple had been mumbling between themselves intimately ever since arriving, Seth's eyebrows shot up and he walked forward.
"Are you the head of the Matthews clan? If so, you came at the perfect time. I haven't had a chance to make a move yet, so do you want to be my opponent?"
Fearing that the sword wouldn't recognize the young man, Jeremy quickly reported telepathically,
"That young man is Xavier's student, as well as the progeny of combat, Seth."
The sword clasped his fist and greeted the young man.
"So you're Seth, the progeny of combat. I've long heard your name, but I didn't think that you would be Master Xavier's student.
Don't bother wasting your breath on crap like that. You just have to say whether you wish to fight or not. Your Matthews clan has humiliated my teacher, but your First Elder still refuses to apologize for his misdeeds. If you don't wish to have a duel with me, I'm willing to drop the matter with an apology from you as well." Seth looked at the sword haughtily as he raised his spear imposingly, causing the air to groan under the pressure of his movement. He knew that the sword was a formidable expert who made his name ages ago, but as the progeny of combat, he had already resolved himself never to back down from any opponent. Courage and tenacity would be his strongest weapons. Since he had gone there to vent his teacher's anger, he would have to make sure to beat the three powers into submission so that they would not dare utter another word.
"Fine with having a duel with you as well, but—"
The sword paused for a moment as a smile surfaced on his face.
"I happen to have an appointment for a duel with your teacher. But since the both of us are here, I'd rather settle that matter first before dealing with whatever you have for me."
"Do you think that any random person on the street is qualified to duel with my esteemed teacher?"
Seth harumphed.
"Of course, if you can get past me, there will be nothing I can say about you challenging my teacher. But if you can't, just know that I won't stop until you finally apologize.
Your words make sense. It is perfectly normal for a student to stand up on his teacher's behalf, and that's nothing I can say about it, the sword said. However, the perpetrator behind the grudge with the Matthews clan is your teacher, and only when he resolves it personally will others be able to accept the outcome. As a student, don't you think that it might be too disrespectful of you to meddle in every single one of your teacher's affairs? Well, if word spreads, people will think that the matter was resolved only because Master Xavier took in a good student, and that wouldn't look too good on him, right? Seth was at a loss for words. His mind had been preoccupied with how he could vent his teacher's anger, so he hadn't thought too deeply about the possible implications for his teacher as a result of his actions. He hated to admit it, but the sword was right. Of course, there was no issue with a student stepping forward to protect their teacher, but if they went overboard, it would make their teacher appear incompetent instead. And incompetence was one word that no master teacher would ever want their name to be associated with. Teacher, Realizing all of this, Seth turned to his teacher in search of his opinion, only to see the latter chuckling softly. It's fine. I can handle this matter. It's true, I had an appointment for a duel with the head of the Matthews clan, and since he wishes to proceed with it, I'm more than willing to entertain him.
Teacher, your current cultivation room!
Seth exclaimed anxiously. His teacher was only at Dimension Sundering Realm primary stage, whereas the head of the Matthews clan was able to execute a burst of sword energy to deflect Rose's puppet from such a long distance away. This showed that his cultivation was surely above Saint Level 9. Considering the huge disparity in their cultivation realms, how were they supposed to fight with one another? Making use of the crimson droplets formed from the Pavilion Master Seal, Xavier currently wielded strength far beyond his limits. But, due to his high soul depth, the nature of the Heaven's Path gleam, and the fact that he hadn't showcased it at all, not even Seth was aware of the massive change in his teacher's fighting prowess over the past few seconds. Knowing what Seth was worried about, the sword added with a smile, I can lower my cultivation Master Xavier's level, and it will only be a simple duel of swordsmanship, so you can rest assured that I won't injure your teacher. If I lose, I'll apologize to you on behalf of the Matthews clan and not pursue everything that happened before. However, if I win, I'll have to ask Master Xavier to abide by the agreement that was made previously. When Xavier previously challenged the sword to a duel, he had promised that he would join the Matthews clan as an elder if he lost it. Of course, I won't renege on my promise, Xavier nodded. However, since it's a duel, I won't take advantage of you either. There's no need for you to suppress your cultivation. Just bring forth your strongest move against me. You want me to use my strongest move against you? The sword was taken aback. Given his cultivation realm, if he used his strongest move, even Pavilion Master Ren would have trouble dealing with it. Did the Dimension Sundering Realm primary stage young man really mean the words that he said? Has that fellow gone mad? Ren, Jeremy, and the others were perplexed by Xavier's words as well. They had seen the young man's strength earlier, and other than his many means and powerful students, there was really nothing spectacular about him at all. To actually ask the sword to use his strongest move against him without suppressing his cultivation, that was as good as asking to be killed. That's right, Xavier nodded. On top of that, I'll sit here and fight you with a single hand. If my body moves in the slightest or my other hand is utilized, I'll admit my defeat. The sword's face twitched upon hearing those words. He had two reasons for challenging Xavier to a fight. Firstly, he wanted to check if the young man was his son. Secondly, he could better resolve the enmity between the young man and the Matthews clan through this manner, appeasing the elders of the Matthews clan while carefully controlling his strength to ensure that the young man didn't sustain any grievous wounds. It was one thing for the young man not to reciprocate his goodwill, but to utter such arrogant words on top of that. He sure is like you. Just as the sword was about to explode from rage, he suddenly heard his wife's voice in his ears, and his body twitched in horror. Am I really that arrogant? You were even more arrogant than him when you were younger. Saint Lana replied with a smile. The sword scratched his head before looking at Xavier helplessly. All right, then. Since that is your request, I will do just that. After saying those words, he descended from the sky to the ground. But the moment his foot came into contact with the ground, the telepathic voice of his wife echoed in his mind.
If you so much as harm a single strand of hair on my son, do not dream of getting into my bed in the future.
The sword staggered upon hearing those words.
Teacher!
In contrast to the sword's tearfulness, Seth, Gia, and the others directed worried gazes at Xavier. Each of them had a fortuitous encounter of their own that allowed them to improve swiftly. However, their teacher hadn't been lucky enough to have such an encounter, so his cultivation had ended up lagging behind them at the Dimension-Sundering Realm primary stage. With his current strength, there was no way that he could stand a chance against the full-powered sword. There was absolutely zero chance of victory at all.
Guys, don't worry. When has our teacher waged a war that he's not confident of winning? Since our teacher said such words, he definitely has a plan in mind,
Alan said with a smile. Seth pondered for a moment before nodding. I guess that is true. Gia had come under Xavier's lineage a little late, so she was unaware of how many past exploits he had. Nevertheless, she still had a rough grasp of the latter's temperament and character. If there was one thing that she was certain about, this teacher of hers would never take the short end of the stick. Those who dared challenge him would only end up tragically defeated.
Wait a moment. Have any of you realized that our teacher's aura seems to have changed?
Rose suddenly spoke up.
I could still roughly gauge the depth of his strength earlier, but right now, no matter how I look at him, it's like staring into an endless ocean, unable to see the end of it no matter how I squint.
Those words prompted Seth, Gia, and the others to take a look at their teacher once more. And indeed, there were some significant changes with him. Even though he was still seated on the spot, the energy within his body appeared to have been amplified many times over, reaching a level that even they couldn't accurately gauge anymore.
Our teacher might have made a breakthrough again,
Lars suggested with uncertainty. As a soul oracle, his sensitivity to his environment was much higher than the others. Just a moment ago, his teacher had still been at a level that he could defeat easily. But right now, just by standing in the vicinity of his teacher, he felt a powerful pressure suffocating him. He had no idea just what could induce such a massive change in his teacher within such a short period of time, but considering that it was his teacher whom they were talking about, even the impossible didn't seem too impossible anymore. Seeing that his teacher was prepared, Seth was finally able to calm the worries in his heart. With a light chuckle, he ushered the others to the side and said,
"Since that's the case, there's no need for us to worry then. Let's just sit back and watch our teacher teach the sword a lesson."
Remembering dearly his wife's threat, the sword took a deep breath before he flicked his wrist and whipped out his sword. Make your move. I fear I might accidentally injure you if I wield my sword. Since it's a friendly duel, I'll pass on using it. Xavier glanced at the sword and spoke composedly. You aren't going to wield a sword. How do you intend to fight then? At that moment, the sword felt like clawing his hair out. There was really no way to communicate with such arrogant fools. Fine, he admitted that he'd been pretty egotistical when he was younger, often trying to humble brag whenever the opportunity arose. However, even he hadn't reached this level of boastfulness before. It was almost as if the young man was trying to slap his face with every sentence. Anyone else in his shoes would have already turned irrational from rage at this point. But somehow, toward the young man sitting before him, he couldn't get angry even if he wanted to. He was still not too sure whether the young man was truly his son or not, but he could grasp what his wife was saying. It was hard to put it into words, but it felt like there was an inseparable connection between him and the young man. I'll just fight you. like this. Oblivious to the thoughts running through the sword's mind, Xavier flicked his finger, and a surge of sword energy exactly 3 feet long gathered at the tip of his finger, emanating a cold glint. Very well, then. Do whatever pleases you. Just try to avoid getting hurt, all right? It was hard to tell if it was out of rage or frustration, but the sword heaved a deep sigh, following which he flicked his sword and pierced it right toward Xavier. He had only used 1/10 of his might, but he didn't hold back on his sword intent at all. The moment that the sword stabbed forth, it transcended through space and appeared right in front of Xavier's forehead the next moment. Not bad. I have to say that your swordsmanship is quite decent. Xavier chuckled softly. As expected of the #1 expert of the Matthews clan's swordsmanship. As soon as he made his move, it was immediately apparent that his swordsmanship had reached a much higher level than Carlyle and the others. Without bothering to dodge, Xavier remained seated on the spot. He continued to reconstruct Sarah's life energy paths with his left hand while raising his right hand and tapping the space in front of him. A burst of sword energy shot forth from his fingertip, and it transcended the limitations of space in an instant. Be it the initiation move, the intent, or the release of the technique, the sword art that Xavier had just executed was completely identical to that of the swords. If the others weren't aware of the hostile relationship between Xavier and the Matthews clan, they would have thought that they were brothers from the same lineage sparring with one another. However, even though it was the exact same move, Xavier's attack managed to reach its target first despite its later release. From the looks of it, the sword's swordsmanship would be undone before it could push even the slightest centimeter forward. The sword's body recoiled in astonishment at the unexpected turn of events as he gasped in disbelief. How is this possible? The sword's understanding of the Matthews clan swordsmanship had already reached an inconceivable level. Every subtle movement that he made was in alignment with the essence of the speed sword quintessence. Yet, the young man was still able to get to him faster despite releasing his sword art later. Not only that, but the young man's strength had also far surpassed his. If he failed to dodge this move, the young man would swiftly nullify any strength that he commanded, such that his sword wouldn't be able to deal any damage even if it fell on the young man's body. Knowing that he was facing a true expert, the sword decisively gave up on the idea of going easy on him. He took a deep breath before sliding his feet half a step back, after which his sword curved in a unique and bizarre trajectory, forcefully transforming a pierce into a... You're going to the extent of executing the dragon-slaying sword? You... Upon seeing the move that her husband had executed, Saint Lana nearly exploded. If there was anyone in this world who knew the sword the best, it was indubitably her. The two of them had practiced the dragon-slaying sword for quite some time before they'd been able to achieve some level of accomplishment in the sword art. While it wasn't the strongest sword art that they had, the might that it commanded was mind-boggling. Even Ren would become flustered before it. To execute such a move against him barely after the battle has started. Didn't I tell you to go easy on him? Is that how you take my instructions? Saint Lana gnashed her teeth furiously. You reacted faster than I thought you could. While Xavier had managed to outdo the head of the Matthews clan at the first encounter, he had to admit that the other party was a pretty formidable opponent. The other party was actually able to instantaneously determine that his defense would arrive faster than his offense, and he decisively changed his assault and launched a counterattack. Chuckling softly, Xavier raised his right hand once more and tapped his finger forward. It was the same move as before, however, this time, the target wasn't the sword's forehead, but his shoulder. Under normal circumstances, the sword's strike would have struck down on Xavier's head first, due to the longer distance from Xavier's finger to the sword's shoulder. However, from the trajectory of his hack, if the sword continued his offense, his wrist would cross paths with Xavier's burst of sword energy. With the sharpness of his sword energy, there was no doubt that the sword's wrist would be severed before his sword could strike down on Xavier's head. The sword's face twitched upon realizing this fact. He had thought that given the disparity in their cultivation, he should be able to easily defeat that young man. Who would have thought that even when he utilized his full strength, he still would be unable to outdo the young man? He might have been young, but his eyes seemed to see right through his sword arts and maneuvers. Each and every time, the young man was able to read his movements and seal his offense swiftly. Not only that, but the worst thing was that the other party was still using the exact same move. That move was the most basic sword art of the Matthews clan swordsmanship, known as the probing sword. Just as the name suggested, the purpose of this was to probe the other party's moves and gauge the depth of the other party's strength before launching a decisive counterattack at a critical moment. Yet, using such a basic move, the young man had actually managed to seal off his offense twice. Just how deep was his mastery in swordsmanship? I can't believe this! The sword knew that his wrist would be sliced right off if he forcefully pushed on with his current assault, so he took half a step back and flicked his sword once more. In an instant, innumerable cold glints flashed across Xavier's eyes, reminiscent of the countless stars in the sky, and they darted right for Xavier's eyes. Falling Sword of the Starry Sky. This was a sword art that had taken him 3 years to create. It still wasn't his strongest move, but it was at least 2 times stronger than the dragon-slaying sword that he had executed previously. This move consisted of countless pierces from differing directions, which made it extremely difficult to deal with. On top of that, it also had a beguiling effect on one's mind and soul. The first time he had executed it, even Saint Lana had suffered a bit under its incredible prowess. Since his first 2 moves had been foiled, the sword had no intention of holding back anymore. As soon as the attack was executed, Xavier felt as if he was standing amid countless stars. His surroundings seemed to have emptied, and it felt as if he was standing in the midst of a place devoid of the concepts of time and space. In such a state, it was difficult for him to even perceive his directions, let alone determine where the attacks were coming from. To make an analogy, it was similar to how a celestial body looked the exact same no matter how fast it was approaching one, making it hard to gauge its exact distance away using one's eyes. This was currently the kind of attack that Xavier was facing. In the face of this sword art, he found himself unable to accurately perceive how far he was from the sword pierces, and that was something extremely dangerous in battle. "Teacher!" Seth grasped onto his spear tightly as cold sweat trickled down his body. Even he couldn't say for sure if he'd be able to overcome that sword art with his current strength. Would his teacher be in danger then? Before the many anxious gazes centered on him, Xavier finally moved. No different from his previous movement, he executed another probing sword right toward the sword. The sword energy flew forth, but just as it was within some distance from reaching its target, it suddenly seemed to have struck something. Following which, all of the stars collapsed, and the phenomenon that the sword art had created vanished without a trace. The sword felt his blood churning furiously as he retreated 8 steps, and his widened eyes stared intently at Xavier in disbelief and shock. The probing sword was actually able to overcome my falling sword of starry sky! How is this possible? While this move wasn't the strongest sword art that he had cultivated, its might was still not to be underestimated. He couldn't accept the fact that his falling sword of starry sky could actually be overcome by such a simple technique. It was no different from a mortal battle technique overpowering a saint battle technique. Xavier chuckled softly, and with the voice of a wise elder, he said, "The sword is but an extension of one's strength. As long as one's able to bring it to a certain point at a certain moment, it'll be able to defeat any enemy. Sword arts are auxiliary maneuvers that serve to achieve that aim. For the probing sword might be the simplest move in the Matthews clan swordsmanship, but it's precisely due to its simplicity that it's flexible enough to be used in many unpredictable situations. In the hands of an expert, its strength can truly be fearsome. It's similar to a drunkard holding a sword, hacking around randomly. There might not be any order of any sort to it, but it's fearsome precisely because of its unpredictable nature. It's impossible to fathom the intention of the attacker, along with when and where the next attack will land. Of course, just the randomness and unpredictability of one's offense isn't enough. The reason why a cultivator is able to curb an armed drunkard easily is due to the lack of purpose in his offense. Only when one could grasp the enemy's intents and attack trajectory would one be able to launch attacks purposefully to curb the enemy's offense. I have to admit that your falling sword of Starry Sky is formidable. It locks onto its target's mind, spirit, and psyche, making it difficult to escape. However, in order to lock on to the target's mind, spirit, and psyche, there must be some kind of intermediary energy to establish a connection, and that intermediary is the very opening in your move. My counterattack was simple. It accurately struck the intermediary. But given so, it's inevitable that your sword art would collapse altogether. But to make an analogy, this is similar to the concept of bringing down a fortress. It might seem impregnable on the surface, but as long as one strikes it at its crux, one can easily bring an entire fortress to the ground. The simplicity in one's swordsmanship might not necessarily be a bad thing. If utilized well in the right manner, it can achieve spectacular results. At this point, Xavier turned to the sword and sighed deeply before saying, "It's not that I want to lecture you, but you're overly obsessed with the form and movement of your sword, to the extent that you've lost sight of what swordsmanship truly is." I. The sword's face reddened. As one of the strongest sword practitioners in the world, he had actually ended up being lectured by a young man who could very well be his child. His face immediately burned bright red from embarrassment. There's no need to be embarrassed by that. It's already very rare for someone of our era to be able to come up with a sword art and sword intent. Xavier consoled him with a smile. If you're willing to learn, I can offer you some pointers in your swordsmanship so that you can further your skills. Hearing Xavier's words, St. Lana began trembling uncontrollably. She couldn't hold herself back and burst into hearty laughter. As expected of her son, he sure was gutsy. "What's that?" she shouted. Her husband had grown too arrogant from being in a high position for too long. For some reason, she felt exceptionally refreshed to see him getting pummeled by their son. Hearing St. Lana's words, many of the 9-star master teachers and the experts of the Matthews clan exchanged glances. Just whose side was the matriarch of the Matthews clan on? Gia, Rose, and the others were dumbfounded as well. Despite seeing her husband getting pummeled and lectured, she was still able to cheer the other party on so happily. Those of the Matthews clan sure were peculiar. The sword looked at his wife, who was laughing so hard that she seemed to be about to fall from the sky, before turning his sight to the young man who was staring at him earnestly. This made the sword want to explode in rage. Were it not for his cultured upbringing, he would have been hurling vulgarities at this moment. It just so happens that my mastery of swordsmanship surpasses yours a little, and I wish to trade some insights with you. There's no need to get too nervous, Xavier said. There's no need for that. The sword flung his sleeves and harumphed. We could trade insights after the duel is over. I still have another move here, and if you can block it, I'll consider it your victory. Without waiting for the other party to respond, the sword harumphed coldly and thrust his sword straight forward. On the other hand, Xavier shook his head and tapped his finger over once more. It was still the same probing sword, but this time, his sword energy was much sharper than before. It pierced right through space as soon as it appeared, creating a pitch-black trail along the path of its movement. Is that dimension-severing sword energy? To be able to cleave space with his sword energy. But that's an ability that only the strongest great sages possess. Isn't he only in the dimension-severing realm? How is he this powerful? The expressions of all those present warped in shock. This was especially so for Jeremy, June, and the others. Their faces had turned ghastly white in disbelief. All along, they had attributed the damage that Xavier had caused to his ability to command the lightning tribulation. His strength should have been nothing of concern to them at all. When in the world did he become so powerful? Had they known in advance, they would have simply left the matter be instead of causing such a huge fuss only to embarrass themselves. Ren also widened his eyes in horror. If he had known that Xavier was such a powerful master teacher, he never would have issued an arrest warrant on him. Just the ability to pull off dimension-severing sword energy meant that the strength that Xavier wielded was already comparable to the Grand Elders, and even as the Deputy Pavilion Master, he had no right to deal with a master teacher of that caliber. Ren swallowed as he turned his gaze to Seth and the others.
It's no wonder he was able to train so many formidable students.
However, he swiftly noticed something peculiar among the group of students. There was no sign of surprise on their faces, as if Xavier's abrupt power growth was perfectly normal. It was almost as if they felt it was only a given for Xavier to be that powerful. Before everyone's shocked gaze, Xavier's sword energy finally arrived before the sword. The sword didn't seem to be intending to go down without a fight either. He flicked his sword, and with a silver streak of light, it flew right for Xavier's throat. Upon seeing that move, St. Lana widened her eyes in horror.
3 swords of the Grim Reaper!
The 3 swords of the Grim Reaper was the ultimate technique that she and the sword had cultivated for many years in order to serve as their ultimate trump card, only to free themselves from the direst of situations. So far, they hadn't been cornered to the point where they'd ever had to use it. But to think that its first use would actually be on their son. St. Lana immediately whipped out her sword and prepared to dash forward to save her son. However, at that moment, she saw the edges of the young man's lips creeping into a smile, and he calmly opened his mouth to speak. Stop! Everything in the surroundings seemed to come to a halt. The incomparably sharp sword that the sword was dragging toward Xavier's neck abruptly froze in midair like a fish frozen within a block of ice. Go. With another calm word, the sword energy gathered at Xavier's fingertip shot outward, and the 3 swords of the Grim Reaper immediately unraveled. At the same time, the sword sustained a heavy blow, and he was forced to retreat several steps.
You! What's that dimension-sealing diction?
The sword widened his eyes in shock as his body trembled in fear. Only a demonic tunist who had refined their art to the level of an ancient sage would be able to wield the ability to seal space at their word. No one in the demonic tunist guild had achieved it in countless millennia, yet Xavier had actually managed to pull it off. How could that be possible? It wasn't exactly dimension-sealing diction. It just so happens that your state of mind at the moment is a little weak, so I'm able to easily influence you with my words and force you to stop driving your gleam, Xavier said. He might have wielded powers invincible beneath Ancient Sage after taming the Pavilion Master Seal, but it was still beyond his means to execute the demonic tunist's dimension-sealing diction. The reason he could get the other party to stop was through his impartation of Heaven's will, augmented by his exceptionally high soul depth and heart of a teacher, thus compelling the sword to follow his bidding without any questions asked. In truth, even if he didn't use this move, given his current strength, he would have still been able to defeat the sword with ease. However, this was the method that would bring the most shock to the crowd, and knowing that there was a limit to the duration of the droplet of power, this was what he needed as well. The sword pondered for a moment before making sense of what had happened. Absolutely incredible! His eyes glowed in agitation as he turned to the young man. The fury in his eyes had subsided, and it was replaced with pride and delight instead. A huge commotion had occurred when his son was born, and that was more than enough to tell anyone of the extraordinary fate that had lain ahead of his son. However, several unfortunate events had occurred afterward, and he had thought that his son's talents would forever be buried in the dust, never to shine brightly. Who would have thought that when they met once more, his son would be stronger and more talented than he had ever expected? There's no need to test him anymore. He's definitely my son. Only my son could wield such capabilities and means. This thought sent surges of exhilaration through the sword's veins, and he began laughing heartily. When he finally calmed down once more, he looked at Xavier and said, "Since you were able to overcome even my strongest 3 swords of the Grim Reaper, I admit defeat." "You're going to admit defeat?" Xavier was taken aback. Going by previous encounters with the Matthews clan, the opponent should have continued provoking him out of concern for their dignity and reputation, all the way until they were severely wounded and incapacitated. He didn't think that the sword would give up so easily. This was a matter that concerned the entire Matthews clan, but the sword was still able to remain rational and not allow the weight of his responsibility to blind himself. This gave Xavier a very favorable impression of him. "I would only embarrass myself further at this point, but since that's the case, I might as well admit defeat." The sword laughed. As one of the top sword practitioners on the Master-Teacher continent, his pride wouldn't allow him to lose to others. However, if it was his own son, he would be more than delighted to do so. "But, Clanhead!" By the side, Jeremy did not expect such an outcome, and a look of panic surfaced on his face. The sword's admittance of defeat meant that not only would the Matthews clan have to drop all charges against the young man, but it would even have to apologize to him. As the #1 Sage clan with a heritage that could be traced back many millennia, it had never suffered such a humiliation before. "I know what you want to say, but my decision is the clan's decision. Nothing you say will change anything." The sword waved his hand to stop the First Elder from speaking anymore. After which, he turned his sight back to Xavier and hesitated for a moment before switching over to Gleam Telepathy. "Master Xavier, there's something that I would like to ask you." "Sword, feel free to ask. If it's something that I can speak of, I'll answer your doubts." Xavier nodded. To be willing to take the initiative to admit defeat and even shoot down Jeremy's words, Xavier's impression of him was growing more and more favorable. "Well, the sword stared at him with a slightly awkward and nervous look as he asked, "Is there a, scarlet birthmark on your rear?" "Birthmark? On my rear?" Xavier was taken aback. After transcending to this world, he had washed his body numerous times. Indeed, there was a scarlet birthmark on his rear, but this should have been something that only he knew. So how could this middle-aged man know about it? Xavier eyed the middle-aged man before him suspiciously. Could he possess some ability similar to the Library of Heaven's Path that allowed him to look at his opponent's body? But having a birthmark wasn't a flaw, so it would be impossible for the Library of Heaven's Path to detect it. Moreover, he possessed the discarnate constitution of divination, so if by any chance seers tried to divine his body, they wouldn't be able to find anything at all. Thinking about it again, it wasn't that rare for a person to have a birthmark on their rear, right? But, you... Xavier couldn't help but look at the sword doubtfully, confused by the intention behind his question. Seeing the implicit admittance from Xavier, the sword's heartbeat quickened, and with irrepressible agitation he continued asking, "Is your birthday on the 10th day of the 9th month, Teacher Appreciation Day?" Birthday? Xavier shook his head in response. I'm an orphan, so I'm afraid I don't really know when my actual birthday is." His previous self had been wandering the world as far as he could remember. Nowhere in his recollections had his father, mother, or any clues to his birthday appeared. I'll just be perfectly honest with you. Noticing the confusion on the young man's face deepening, the sword decided not to beat around the bush anymore and got straight to the point. If I'm not mistaken, you're very likely to be my long-lost son. Your son? Xavier was stunned for a moment before a miniature explosion erupted in his mind. But by your son, are you referring to the young prodigy? The sword wasn't only the head of the Matthews clan, but also the father of the young prodigy. As far as he knew, the sword seemed to have only that single son. So the other party's words would mean that he was the young prodigy. Xavier's mind was immediately plunged into chaos. For the past few months, he had been cursing the young prodigy. Never had he thought that the young prodigy would actually be him. No, that's not right. I checked for the presence of the Matthews clan bloodline in me as well, but I saw that there was no relationship between me and the Matthews clan. Xavier swiftly raised his rebuttal. He had once wondered if he was from the Matthews clan as well, and for that, he had even borrowed Nathaniel's blood essence to conduct a blood test. The result from that test showed that there was absolutely no relationship between him and the Matthews clan at all. Taking a step back, even if that blood test was inaccurate, he did enter the Matthews clan's blood reservoir at one point in time, but he didn't feel the slightest resonance with it. All of the clues went to show that there was no relationship between him and the Matthews clan. So, how could the sword possibly be his father? The matter concerning your Matthews clan bloodline has serious implications, so I'll explain it to you when we're in a more, private setting. However, if you still harbor any doubts regarding the matter, you can verify your blood with my wife. Even if you've lost your Matthews clan bloodline, your mother's blood should still flow through your veins, the sword said as he gestured for St. Lana to come over. St. Lana could tell that the two men had been communicating telepathically with one another, so she swiftly flew over with an agitated look on her face. Xavier hesitated for a moment before asking, "How do we conduct the test?" Given the sword's strength and standing, there was no need for him to cook up such a lie. Furthermore, to point out that there was a scarlet birthmark on his rear, while that might not be conclusive evidence, it might be good to investigate. Whether it was real or not, at least there would be some closure for him and the Sword Saint. Otherwise, this matter would forever weigh on their minds. If, by chance, he really happened to be the missing young prodigy, there would no longer be anyone to stop him from marrying Eva. Everything would fall into place, and it would be a happy ending. Of course, it would be a little awkward for him to suddenly find himself with two parents, but perhaps because he'd been an orphan in his previous life as well, he wasn't too put off by the notion. It wouldn't be too difficult for him to accept the matter with time. Even if that wasn't the case, it wouldn't make any difference to his plans anyway. After the other party apologized to him, he would have nothing to do with the Matthews clan anymore. The current him already wielded sufficient power and influence to stand against the Natalie clan and the Matthews clan. If they weren't willing to budge, he would just have to force them. This was one matter that he simply wasn't willing to relent on. "Just give me a droplet of your blood," St. Lana told Xavier telepathically. Xavier tapped his finger forward, and a droplet of blood flew forth from his fingertip. Taking a deep breath, St. Lana took out a jade token and carefully placed the blood droplet on it, after which she made a small incision on her finger and squeezed out a droplet of blood on the jade token as well. As the two droplets of blood made contact with one another, they swiftly fused together. With a light, buzzing sound, the jade token exuded a blinding crimson light. "That's..." St. Lana's eyes immediately reddened, and her body trembled from agitation. Your name is Xavier, right? My son. Xavier was still in a dumbfounded state. He turned his gaze toward the jade token to examine it closely. He recognized the artifact. It was a tool used to test one's bloodline. Those who had direct blood relations would not only have their blood droplets fusing together, but the jade token would also emanate a blinding crimson light. In other words, he had direct blood relations with Saint Lana. Could this mean that he was really the son of the Sword Saint? So, he was the very same young prodigy whom he'd hated with a passion. Could this be the will of the heavens? Not only was Master K, whom he had mentioned on a whim, a real person, but even his fate with Eva was also predestined. The sword was also stunned by the results before he took a deep breath and burst into hearty laughter. We found him! He had still been uncertain before this. After all, what were the odds of finding the son they had lost many years back amid the massive Master-Teacher continent? However, seeing the two droplets of blood fusing perfectly with one another, even this final sliver of doubt vanished from the bottom of his heart. After the two men were done fighting, they'd begun communicating telepathically with one another. Then, all of a sudden, everyone had become agitated at once. Unable to take the suspense any longer, Ren hurriedly asked, "Sword, what's wrong?" "Pavilion Master Ren, our Matthews clan shall drop all enmity with Xavier. We'll no longer pursue the previous matters. Also, I hope that the Master-Teacher Pavilion will sell our Matthews clan a favor and retract the arrest warrant." The sword clasped his fist. "You want us to retract the arrest warrant?" Ren could hardly believe what he was hearing. Previously, it was the Matthews clan who had stirred the pot the most violently. Why would they suddenly drop the matter and even request him to retract the arrest warrant? Once the Master-Teacher Pavilion issues an arrest warrant, it cannot be retracted easily, unless there are some kind of unique circumstances. What has happened? Ren asked once more. If the Master-Teacher Pavilion issued and retracted its arrest warrant lightly, that would be as good as undermining the authority of its own words. Even if they wanted to retract it, they would have to find a valid, compelling reason to do so. "Xavier is the missing young prodigy of my Matthews clan. My son. We've just verified it with a blood test, so there's no mistake about it," the sword said. "Our teacher is the young prodigy of the Matthews clan?" Seth and the others stared at one another in shock. They had followed their teacher ever since their time in the Olmec Kingdom, most of them, and they were painfully aware of just how poor their teacher was. He had slowly paved his way forward with his own strength and cunning, having no one to rely on at all. How in the world did he become one of the core members of the Matthews clan within such a short period of time? Not to mention the legendary figure who was born as a Khanate saint, the young prodigy. With an incredulous look on his face, Jeremy roared in disbelief. "That's impossible! I tested his bloodline, and he definitely has no relationship with the Matthews clan at all." "Jeremy, are you insinuating that I can't even recognize my own son?" The sword harumphed coldly. "As the first elder of the Matthews clan, you actually tried to assassinate him and issued an arrest warrant on your own clan head. Return to the clan right now and await your punishment. Do not force me to make a move." Jeremy staggered weakly on the spot, and his face became ghastly pale. If Xavier was truly the young prodigy, that would mean that he was the real clan head of the Matthews clan. Even as the first elder, the crime of attempting to kill the head of the Matthews clan was more than enough to sentence him to death multiple times. "He's your son." Ren widened his eyes in disbelief as well. He had run a check on Xavier's background before issuing the arrest warrant, and it was stated that the young man was an orphan from the Olmec Kingdom, having no background at all. Yet, in the blink of an eye, they were actually telling him that he was the head of the Matthews clan. If that was true, the Matthews clan was perfectly justified in requesting the retracting of the arrest warrant. Indeed, there's no mistake about this. The sword roared in laughter, his delight showing clearly on his face. Ever since his son disappeared, they had traveled far and wide in search of him. The past 20 years had not been easy for them. They had lived in trepidation, uncertain of the fate of their child. It was fortunate that the heavens had not abandoned them. They had managed to find their child in the end. Furthermore, not only had their child managed to grow to become an outstanding individual, wielding power stronger than them, but the students that he had trained had also become powerhouses of the Master Teacher continent. With such a son, what more could they wish for? All of a sudden, they felt as if they were the luckiest people in the world. Ren pondered for a moment before replying.
Since your Matthews clan has decided to make peace with Xavier, and he's apparently the young prodigy of the Matthews clan as well, it would indeed be illogical for the Matthews clan to continue pursuing this matter. If the other two powers are willing to settle this matter peacefully, I have no qualms with retracting the arrest warrant.
Were it anyone else, even if both parties had decided to settle the matter peacefully, the Master Teacher Pavilion would surely have made him pay a hefty price. However, the 5 students that Xavier had trained were the head of the Poison Hall, an expert of the Soul Oracles, the future Hall Master of the Combat Master Hall, the young Master of the Price Clan, and the head of the Spirit Awakener Guild. And now, it had even been revealed that Xavier himself was the head of the Matthews clan. Even the Master Teacher Pavilion would find it difficult to punish such a person. Before they could even lay a finger on him, more than a dozen 9-star Master Teachers of the Master Teacher Pavilion headquarters had already been incapacitated. If they insisted on dealing with Xavier, even if they won the war, the Master Teacher Pavilion would surely be in shambles afterward. By requesting for the arrest warrant to be retracted, the sword had effectively provided a platform for the Master Teacher Pavilion to back out of this mess without suffering a heavy hit to its reputation. Naturally, there was no reason for him not to grab this opportunity. Simple. Chuckling softly, the sword turned to June and said, Elder June, we were once sparring partners, and I consider you an old acquaintance of mine. Will you be willing to do me this favor and let this matter go? I'll surely pay you a visit in the future and compensate you for the Glacier Plain Court's loss.
Sword, this is no longer a matter about compensating our loss anymore, but our dignity,
June harumphed furiously.
So what if he is your son? He has destroyed the many millennia of heritage of our Glacier Plain Court and kidnapped our young court chief. The grudge between the Glacier Plain Court and him is already irreconcilable.
With the severe damage it had suffered, along with the loss of its future court chief, it was only a matter of time before the Glacier Plain Court was reduced to a third-tier power. A power that had enjoyed many millennia of glory had ended up falling so far in her hands. The greatest pride in her life was when she was chosen to become the first elder of the Glacier Plain Court. She had become a celebrated figure on the Master Teacher continent, respected wherever she went. However, beneath this glorious exterior, she knew she had to shoulder the hopes and dreams of everyone in the Glacier Plain Court. Thus, she had vowed solemnly to bring the Glacier Plain Court to a height that it had never seen before, and she viewed it as her purpose in life. But that day, when everything had been destroyed by lightning, her hopes and dreams had been utterly crushed, and all that was left was raging fury for the culprit behind it. As such, even though she knew that the winds were no longer in her favor, her anger and indignation still bit tightly into her rational mind, not allowing her to let this matter go. Seeing the infuriated state that June was in, the sword was just about to placate her when another wrathful voice sounded.
So what if it's irreconcilable? Are you planning to make a move on my son? Just try touching a strand of his hair, and I'll make sure the entire city of Glacier is dyed crimson. My son might have been kind enough to only destroy your buildings. I won't be as compassionate. If you don't back down, you can rest assured that there won't be a tomorrow for your Glacier Plain court.
The one who had just spoken was St. Lana. She had just been rejoicing over the fact that her son was alive when June suddenly uttered such words. Seeing that there was someone threatening the life of her son, how could she possibly remain calm? It was only in view of the pathetic state that the Glacier Plain court was in that she chose to let them off despite their attempts to kill her son. Yet who could have thought that they would still be so unrelenting on the matter?
I know that I am no match for you, and if you wish to massacre our Glacier Plain court, there's nothing I can do to stop you. But justice is in the hearts of every single one of us here. The Matthews clan might be powerful, but the world won't turn a blind eye to you abusing your power in such a manner.
June gritted her teeth.
So, let the world look with their eyes wide open as I massacre your Glacier Plain court.
Seeing how June was still trying to play the role of a victim after what she'd done, St. Lana was indignant. At this moment, she wasn't in any mood to catch up with Xavier anymore. She raised the sword in her hand up high, ready to make a move on June. Seeing his wife flying into a fit of anger, the sword was shocked. He hurriedly rushed ahead to stop her.
Dear, calm down, calm down.
June might not pose any threat to them, but she represented the entire Glacier Plain court. If she was killed right before Ren and the others, not even the Matthews clan would be able to resolve this matter easily.
Are you still a man? Someone is bullying your son. It's one thing for you not to stand up for him, but you're even stopping me too.
St. Lana's eyebrows shot up in fury. The sword's face turned bitter.
Look, aren't I trying to mediate the situation here? If mediation works, what the hell do we still need to cultivate?
The saint flung her sleeves furiously.
If she doesn't agree to it, we'll just have to beat her into submission. I, St. Lana, have dominated the continent for so many years, and I can tell you that my fist and my sword have won others over, not my virtue. If anyone dares oppose me, I'll just have to beat them till they cave in.
The sword's eyebrows twitched uncontrollably, not knowing how to respond. He knew his wife's character very well. In fact, her hot-headed temper had thrown the Matthews clan into disarray on multiple occasions in the past too. If June continued pursuing this matter, there was no doubt that his wife would really wipe out the entire Glacier Plain court.
Her teacher's mother sure is formidable.
Seth and the others gulped as they watched this sight with widened eyes. To threaten even to destroy the entire Glacier Plain court? It was no wonder their teacher was never on the losing end of things. With such domineering genes in his body, it was a given that those who intended him harm would end up paying the price instead. Xavier's eyebrows twitched slightly upon hearing those words as well. To be honest, he had still been a bit skeptical about the sudden appearance of his father and mother. He'd never experienced any familial relationship before, be it in his current life or the previous one, so he had no idea how it would be. However, watching St. Lana stepping forward domineeringly to protect him, he suddenly felt that it might not be that bad after all.
St. Lana, please calm down. Fighting won't resolve anything here.
Ren stepped in to defuse the situation.
Ren, you still have the guts to say those words!
St. Lana immediately turned her head over and glared daggers at Ren.
Since you know that fighting won't resolve anything, why did you bring so many 9-star master teachers here to encircle my son? Is it because he looks weak to you? Since you want to speak up on June's behalf, why don't you take her place instead, then? I haven't settled the score with you for making a move on my son yet. Carry on. I treat it as if I've never said anything.
Ren's hair stood on end upon hearing those words. Saint Lana was like a bucket of oil, triggering at the slightest spark. Her character had already been so back in her younger years. Back when she was still a student at the Sanctum of Sages, she had caused many uproars amongst the student populace, and when the elders lectured her for it, she simply told them that she would quit the Sanctum of Sages and stomped out without any hesitation. Many had thought that she would tone down after marrying and having her own child, but who could have thought that not even time nor motherhood would calm her temper? And if it was only Saint Lana, Ren still wouldn't have been that fearful. The problem lay in the sword. If the two of them collaborated together, he really wouldn't stand much of a chance. As the head of the Matthews clan, the sword was an intelligent and rational person who knew what to do and what not to do in a situation. But when it came to matters concerning his wife, his rationality would often be blown away like a straw hut in the face of a hurricane. There was no one among the upper echelon of the Master Teacher continent who didn't know how doting he was of his wife, and if anyone dared hurt her, he would immediately go berserk. Back then, while they were roaming the continent, there'd been an elder from a minor power who was foolish enough to insult Saint Lana. Without any hesitation, the sword had flown right over to his sect and wiped it out entirely. In any case, it would be best to avoid provoking this couple as much as possible.
Saint Lana, I know that you are strong, but our Glacier Plane Court won't back down. Unless you kill every single one of us, there's no way we will let this matter go.
June spat as she looked at Saint Lana with deep resolve. She knew that her deeds would earn the ire of the young court chief, and she would suffer the consequences for her actions once the court chief fully awakened her pure feminine body. But as long as the Glacier Plane Court could rise to the top, her sacrifice would have paid off. However, Xavier had reduced the Glacier Plane Court to rubble and kidnapped the young court chief, dashing every last hope that she had. Her desire for vengeance had already exceeded her fear of anything. Even at the cost of her life, she was determined to bring Xavier down.
Very well. Let me see how deep your resolve runs.
Seeing that June was still obstinately holding on, Saint Lana raised her sword high in the sky. But at that moment, a cold voice suddenly echoed.
Saint Lana, please calm down. Allow me to settle this matter instead.
As soon as those words were spoken, the cocoon-like object in front of Xavier suddenly emanated an astounding aura that pierced straight through the clouds, seemingly tearing the heavens apart. Sarah's life energy path reconstruction was complete.
Young court chief!
Upon hearing that voice, June's eyes narrowed in shock. She quickly turned her gaze over, only to see the cocoon blasting apart layer after layer. At the same time, the otherworldly demonic aura that had emanated a moment ago swiftly transformed into a pure feminine aura, and it felt as if everything within tens of thousands of miles would be turned into ice under it. A slender figure burst forth from the cocoon and rose into the air. The surrounding spiritual energy swiftly surged toward her, forming a huge vortex with her at its center. At the same time, the water vapor in the air formed into a glistening icy robe around her, emanating a bone-freezing chill.
That is the perfect awakening of the pure feminine body.
June's body stiffened in astonishment. While the preceding court chiefs had managed to awaken their pure feminine bodies, most had still been far from achieving a perfect awakening. There was a legend in the Glacier Plane Court that if one ever achieved a perfect awakening of the pure feminine body, one would be able to bring frost to over 10,000 miles with just a wave of one's hand. it wouldn't pale in comparison even against the innate poison body. If anything, its prowess might exceed it. Even the founder of the Glacier Plain Court had failed to achieve this level, only barely managing to awaken it through the reconciliation of feminine and masculine energy. Who could have thought that Sarah would actually successfully awaken it? Did her life energy paths not collapse entirely, causing her cultivation to be destroyed? What in the world happened? It's our first senior! Seth and the others clenched their fists in agitation. Not bad. Xavier heaved a sigh of relief. Using the new Life Energy Path network to reconstruct Sarah's life energy paths was a risky move, but it had paid off. Not only had her cultivation been restored, but her pure feminine body had also been fully awakened. With this, she would be able to push her cultivation up to an unfathomable level. It was fortunate that his effort hadn't been in vain. As the vortex of spiritual energy vanished, the young woman's figure appeared before everyone's eyes. She wore a robe made purely out of white snow, and the cold air in the surroundings seemed to bend to her will, as if she was the overlord of ice. June watched the imposing figure in a daze for a moment before hurriedly falling to her knees.
June pays respect to the new court chief of the Glacier Plain Court.
With the complete awakening of her pure feminine body, Sarah would officially be viewed as the court chief of the Glacier Plain Court. This was the rule that had been passed down by the ancestors. Not to mention, Sarah had even achieved a perfect awakening. With this, there was no longer anyone in the Glacier Plain Court, including the wills of the preceding court chiefs, who would dare oppose her.
Very good. It seems like you still recognize me as your court chief. Right now, I shall make my decree.
With her hands behind her back, Sarah gazed down coldly at June.
From this day forth, my teacher, Xavier Matthews, will be the greatest benefactor of the Glacier Plain Court. Any disciples of the Glacier Plain Court must accord him with the respect toward a teacher. Should anyone fail to abide by this decree, they shall be expelled from the Glacier Plain Court and executed upon sight.
Yes, court chief,
June replied with a forceful yet slightly quivering voice.
My teacher has devoted his time and effort in order to awaken my unique constitution. You abused your authority and influence to frame him for sins that he hasn't committed, compelling the Master Teacher Pavilion to issue an arrest warrant on him. I hereby order for June to be imprisoned in the Chanting Serenity Hall, and she is not to leave the compounds without my command.
Sarah spat coldly.
Also, you are to release my mother and return her freedom.
Her mother had been imprisoned by the First Elder for willfully escaping from the Glacier Plain Court. Now that she had become the court chief and wielded unparalleled authority, it went without saying that the first thing that she should do was have her released.
Yes, court chief,
June hurriedly nodded.
Very well. Go on and execute my orders.
Sarah waved her hand authoritatively. June might have been hostile toward her and her mother previously, but her loyalty to the Glacier Plain Court was unquestionable. Sarah had no doubt that June would abide by her commands now that she had become the court chief. Thus, she turned her sight to Wren and said,
Pavilion Master Wren, I believe that you should have heard my decree as well. Xavier is my teacher and my benefactor, and the Glacier Plain Court will do everything within its means to protect him, even if it means going against the Master Teacher Pavilion. I ask of you to reconsider your options.
Wren's eyebrows shot up. Who could have thought that the court chief of the Glacier Plain Court was actually his student too? The Glacier Plain Court, the Poison Hall, the Matthews Clan, the Spirit Awakener Hall, the Combat Master Hall, the Price Clan. Those were behemoths that could send tremors running through the Master Teacher continent with just a stomp of their feet. And yet, they had all bowed to the command of a single man.
Master Henry.
Sighing helplessly, Ren turned his sight to the Deputy Sanctum Head of the Sanctum of Sages and asked,
The Glacier Plain Court and the Matthews clan have already expressed their intentions to reconcile with Master Xavier. May I ask what the stance of your Sanctum of Sages is?
Aye. Master Henry lowered his gaze in a dilemma. This was really a difficult position for him to be in. The Sanctum of Sages was indubitably weaker than both the Glacier Plain Court and the Matthews clan, but it still had to uphold its long legacy as the #1 academy where countless powerhouses had originated from. Considering the devastation that had occurred to it, if they let this matter go so simply, what right would they have to serve as the teachers of the geniuses of the world? More importantly, he wouldn't be able to face those injured elders back in the Sanctum either.
If I drop this matter, the preceding generations of Sanctum Heads will never forgive me, so I can only stake my life in the end. Even if I die from this, at the very least I won't have let the ancestors down,
Master Henry said resolutely. He could chicken out, but the Sanctum of Sages could not. If others learned that the Sanctum of Sages had bowed down to another person, even if the other party was the head of the Matthews clan and had many formidable experts as his students, what authority would it have left? Knowing Master Henry's thoughts, Ren also didn't know what he could say to dissuade the other party. Xavier was a student of the Sanctum of Sages, yet he had refused to abide by its orders and even injured the elders in the Deputy Sanctum Head, not to mention that he had destroyed many of its buildings. If they let this matter go just like that, the Sanctum of Sages would really lose its dignity.
Given that even the sword isn't your match, there's no way that I'll be able to defeat you either.
Master Henry flew into the air and declared resoundingly,
Master Xavier, I have brought the Deputy Sanctum Head token here, and as long as you can withstand its attack, the Sanctum of Sages will let this matter go.
Deputy Sanctum Head token?
That's right,
Master Henry said.
This token represents my identity, and it harnesses the wills of the predecessors. It is one of the guardian artifacts of the Sanctum of Sages, which only generations of Deputy Sanctum Heads are qualified to wield. I wouldn't be a match for you, given my limited cultivation, but through the Deputy Sanctum Head token, I'll still be able to put up a fight against you. You're able to withstand my strength even then. It can only mean that you are beyond the Sanctum of Sages' current means to deal with, and there will be no purpose in pursuing this matter any longer.
Master Henry didn't think that it was too likely that he would be able to defeat Xavier, even with the Deputy Sanctum Head token, but this was still something that had to be done in order to make the Sanctum of Sages' stance clear. If he was still unable to defeat Xavier with the strength of the Deputy Sanctum Head token, that would mean that even the predecessors were unable to defeat him. It would show that while the Sanctum of Sages had no choice but to back down due to its lack of strength, by no means had it grown cowardly or lost its dignity. All right, Xavier nodded. He was currently invincible against all beneath the ancient Sage Realm, so no matter how powerful the Deputy Sanctum Head token was, he was confident that he would be able to withstand it with ease.
Good.
Master Henry tapped his finger forward, and a token emanating a faint violet glow appeared before him. Master Henry bit his finger, and a droplet of his blood fell on it. In an instant, the token turned burningly hot, and a powerful, formidable aura burst forth from it. Countless experts had risen from the Sanctum of Sages over its many years of history, and it was with their wills that the Deputy Sanctum Head token was created. While it came nowhere close to matching up to the real Sanctum Head token, its power was not to be underestimated. Noticing a hint of anxiety on St. Lana's face, the sword grabbed her hand and squeezed it tightly. Rest assured, darling, given that even I'm no match for him, he should be fine.
Go!
Under Master Henry's control, the Deputy Sanctum Head token released a light buzz, and an unbelievable burst of energy shot forth from it. Even before reaching its target, the space in its path was already crumbling, inch by inch. Not bad. In the face of the immense pressure exerted by the Deputy Sanctum Head token, Xavier didn't panic in the least. Instead, with a slight smile, he raised his finger in preparation to deal with the attack before him. At this moment, he had already fully reconstructed Sarah's life energy path, so there was no longer any need for him to remain seated on the ground. Straightening his back, he swiftly drove the energy within his body, intending to seal off the space ahead of him to stop the advancement of the Deputy Sanctum Head token. However, before he could do so, his eyes suddenly narrowed and his body stiffened in horror.
Oh, crap.
He then felt strength receding from his body like an ebbing tide, vanishing instantly. At the same time, his spirit also seemed to have been sapped from his body, and he nearly collapsed to the ground. At this crucial moment, the power that he had gained from the Pavilion Master Seal actually vanished.
Could this be what Keith Cole wanted to say previously? That the power only lasts 10 minutes?
Xavier nearly burst into tears. The unreliable Keith Cole had vanished without explaining the use of the Pavilion Master Seal, and it was the first time that he had used it as well. He had thought that he would still have enough time in order to overcome the current crisis, but who could have thought that he would only have a short 10 minutes? It would have been perfectly simple for him to deal with this attack when he was infused with the strength from the Pavilion Master Seal, but now that it had disappeared, as a Dimension Sundering Realm primary stage cultivator, he might just end up being squashed. Such thoughts swiftly flashed across his mind before vanishing. By this point, the token had already arrived right before him. Just under the pressure of the token, he could already feel his bones creaking in protest, and his head was squeezed to the point that it seemed as if it would burst at any moment. Any more than that, and he would really be exceeding the limits of his body.
Looks like I can only try to escape.
Knowing that the current him didn't wield the strength to overcome the Deputy Sanctum Head token, Xavier took a deep breath and prepared to flee. However, as he was about to do so, a brilliant light suddenly glowed from his body, and following which, the imposing token charging at him in the sky started vibrating intensely. It fell to the floor and lay on the ground, not daring to raise itself in the slightest, almost like a servant paying respects to its master. Xavier was dumbfounded for a moment before discreetly heaving a sigh of relief. The close shave with death earlier had already left his back drenched with sweat. While he was still trying to make sense of the situation that had just happened, in the sky, Master Henry narrowed his eyes in shock, and his face immediately turned pale.
Despite not exerting the slightest strength, he was still able to force the Deputy Sanctum Head token to bow subserviently to him. There's only one possibility for such an occurrence. Deputy Sanctum Head token has viewed Xavier to be a person more esteemed than me and dares not make a move on him. However, the Deputy Sanctum Head token harnesses the wills of countless experts, and to make them bow so respectfully could be this. But how could that be possible? Is it a Cornelius? Or could it be him?
Master Henry shook his head vehemently in disbelief. There was only one thing in the world that could make the Deputy Sanctum Head token submit completely, and that was the Sanctum Head token. While they had learned that Sage Giovanni had chosen a new Sanctum Head candidate recently, they had thought that the person was Cornelius. Yet, contrary to their expectations, it turned out to be Xavier. This massive shock left him feeling as if he could explode on the spot. In his moment of distress, Master Henry turned and saw Jeremy, which made him feel much better. Indeed, no matter how vicious Xavier had been with the Sanctum of Sages, at the very least it wasn't as bad as with the Matthews clan. The fellow would go to the extent of destroying his real home, let alone the Sanctum of Sages. The dismal Master Henry couldn't take it any longer and sent a telepathic message over.
Master Xavier, you're the Sanctum Head.
Xavier nodded. Yes. After receiving the Sanctum Head token, Sage Giovanni had warned him not to tell anyone of his identity until the 3 seals had been deciphered. However, in this case, it was Master Henry who had guessed the truth himself, so it couldn't be considered a breach of the rules. Hearing the confirmation, Master Henry's body staggered.
As expected.
For a deputy sanctum head to actually issue an arrest warrant on the real sanctum head, that was truly a count of insubordination. It was fortunate that Xavier had managed to get away. Otherwise, if he had really killed the sanctum head, he would have become a criminal. Seeing that there was a lack of movement from Master Henry after the deputy sanctum head token fell to the ground, Wren turned and asked,
Master Henry, are you admitting defeat?
While the deputy sanctum head token had been launched with astounding force, it had fallen to the ground before it even reached Xavier. In the eyes of the outsiders, it appeared as if Master Henry was intentionally going easy on him.
I admit defeat.
Master Henry hurriedly nodded.
You said earlier that your grudge with him is irreconcilable, and yet you went easy on him as soon as the battle started. Aren't you taking this matter too lightly? Is that all there is to the dignity of your sanctum of sages?
Elder Clay sneered coldly by the side. The Glacier Plain Court and the Matthews clan had already submitted so far. He had thought that at least the Sanctum of Sages would push its case to the very end, but who could have thought that it would be the most lacking of a backbone?
Elder Clay, this is an internal affair of our Sanctum of Sages. An outsider like you should hold your tongue and refrain from interfering in our issues.
Master Henry replied sharply before pocketing the deputy sanctum head token and backing away. Then he turned around to face the crowd from the Sanctum of Sages and declared,
From today onward our Sanctum of Sages shall be under Master Xavier's leadership. His words are the very decree of the Sanctum of Sages itself. And if anyone dares oppose him, that person will be banished from the Sanctum of Sages, never to be recruited again.
His voice resounded across the entire city, carrying a firm resolve behind it. The elders who had followed Master Henry there looked at one another, flabbergasted by what they had just heard.
Master Henry, even if you choose to let him off, surely our Sanctum of Sages hasn't lowered so much as to have to submit to a person like him. Why, I cannot accept this decree. Even if you can't defeat Master Xavier, surely you don't have to make the entire Sanctum of Sages bow down to him, right? This is illogical. You all want to know the reason?
Master Henry asked.
Yes, we want to know. Without a convincing reason, there's no way we can follow such an order. There, even if our Sanctum of Sages isn't a match for him, we still can't bow to another man so easily, let alone someone like him.
The elders of the Sanctum of Sages protested indignantly.
Very well. I will tell you the reason, then.
Hearing those words, Master Henry shook his head. With a resounding voice, he revealed the truth.
Xavier is our new Sanctum Head.
Our new Sanctum Head?
What does that mean?
Everyone was stupefied.
It means exactly what it sounds like. He is the Sanctum Head that Sage Giovanni has chosen, and that is why my Deputy Sanctum Head token submitted to him, not daring to injure him. Naturally, as the real Sanctum Head, his authority over the Deputy Sanctum Head token is greater than mine, so it heeded his orders instead,
Master Henry said.
How Sanctum Head, but
all of the elders weren't able to process the shocking revelation that they had just heard. Not only them, but the Sword, Wren, and the others were also shocked as well. The head of the Matthews clan, the teacher of the Glacier Plain Court's court chief, and now he had another identity to his name, the Sanctum Head of the Sanctum of Sages. From a man whom the Three Powers had been dying to tear apart, within less than a single hour, he had become a man who commanded all three. Could there be anything more dramatic than this? My son has become the head of the Sanctum of Sages. The Sword Saints stared at one another with eyes widened in shock. Just finding their son was able to bring them the utmost bliss. But who could have thought that their son would be like a pile of mystery boxes, bringing them surprises from unexpected corners one after another? How? How is this possible? Elder Clay's body twitched, and before that moment, he had never felt so tearful in his life. Elder Clay had never had a good impression of Xavier. The first time that they met at the conference room of the Glacier Plain Court, the young man had disguised himself as Master K and discreetly poisoned him. Everything that the young man had done was at odds with the conventions and formalities of the Master-Teacher Pavilion, which only furthered his hostility toward the young man. As such, when he reported the matter to the Master-Teacher Pavilion headquarters, he had intentionally exaggerated certain matters and twisted some facts in order to convince Pavilion Master Wren to issue an arrest warrant for the young man. He had thought that with so many master teachers after him, Xavier would never be able to get away. Yet who could have thought that his students would suddenly appear, each of them being stronger than the last? But even if his students were powerful, as long as the three powers stayed united on the same front and insisted on punishing the young man, they still would have been able to get him in the end. Yet moments later, he had been revealed as the true head of the Matthews clan and the Sanctum of Sages. Even the court chief of the Glacier Plain Court turned out to be his student too. At this rate, the Master-Teacher Pavilion might really turn out to be the young man's before he knew it. He turned to look at the crowd. Every single person in the area had a dazed look on their face, completely shocked by the revelation. Oh, well done, my son! The sword's hearty laughter broke the silence. Our son is a person bound for great things. Putting aside how you were at his age, even the current you can't match him, St. Lana boasted proudly. Her son had still been an infant when she lost him, and for the years after that, there had been many times that she had woken up frightened after dreaming of her son being put through all kinds of hardship and suffering, living a life worse than death. But when they met again, her son had already become the head of the Sanctum of Sages, and his students had all become powerhouses of the Master-Teacher Continent, figures who could stand their own ground in the world without fearing anyone. In fact, it might not be an exaggeration to say that he was one of the most influential figures on the Master-Teacher Continent at this moment. Oh, I almost forgot. Son, to tell you the truth, we betrothed you to someone before you were even born, St. Lana told Xavier hesitantly. Then, she decisively turned to the first elder of the Natalie clan, Clarence, and her rump. Clarence, what should we do about the engagement then? I heard that your princess already has someone whom she fancies. This doesn't seem to be what we agreed on back then. We'll go ahead with the marriage as soon as possible. Hearing those words, a chuckle escaped from Clarence's mouth. As for the person whom our princess fancies, I suppose there won't be any problem with that anymore. You can ask Master Xavier about that. St. Lana turned her gaze back to her son and asked doubtfully, do you know of the matter? She had heard rumors that the princess of the Natalie clan had someone whom she liked, but as the Natalie clan had insisted that they would deal with the matter themselves, she still had no idea who the princess's lover was. With a slightly awkward look on his face, Xavier scratched his head and replied, if I'm not mistaken, the person whom she likes should be me. You? St. Lana widened her eyes in bafflement. That's right. Xavier nodded with a helpless smile. Thinking back, the entire course of events seemed almost like a bad joke that the world was playing on them. First, the Natalie clan had found out that the princess had someone whom she liked and dispatched Joel to assassinate him. Afterward, Joel delegated the task to him, wanting him to do the deed on his behalf. After several incidents, it turned out that he was actually the young prodigy that was supposed to marry the princess. It all felt like a sick joke. If in the first place he was Eva's fiancé, why the hell did he need to undergo all that anxiety, desperation, and hostility over the past few months? Everything would have had a happy ending if his identity was exposed. Oh, how did you manage to win her over? Quick, share the story with your mother. St. Lana immediately cast aside her expert-like aura and put on her gossip face. Xavier stared at St. Lana speechlessly before shaking his head. Let's talk about that later. There's still a few more things that we have to settle first. After saying those words, he turned his sights to Clarence, not too far away, and said, Elder Clarence, since I am the young prodigy and the head of the Matthews clan, your Natalie clan should be able to accept my relationship with the princess, right? If that's the case, I believe that there shouldn't be any need for you to put her under house arrest anymore. Of course, Clarence hurriedly nodded. Previously, he'd still been afraid that the relationship that the princess had outside would foil the Natalie clan's ties with the Matthews clan. Who could have thought that the person whom she liked would so coincidentally be the young prodigy of the Matthews clan, whom she had an engagement with? Since that was the case, why would the Natalie clan continue to restrict their relationship? Let their love take flight. Clarence stroked his beard as he asked the sword, I'll return right now to ask for her release. When does your Matthews clan intend to proceed with the marriage? This future son-in-law of the Natalie clan was not only the head of the Matthews clan, but also the sanctum head of the Sanctum of Sages. On top of that, his students governed the Poison Hall, Combat Master Hall, Spirit Awakener Guild, Glacier Plain Court, and the Price clan. If the Natalie clan could ally together with those powers, its standing would be far stronger than before. Naturally, they couldn't let go of such good son-in-law material. If possible, they would prefer the marriage to happen as soon as possible. Otherwise, once news spread, who knew how many clans would attempt to betroth their daughters to the Matthews clan? I'll first bring him back to our ancestral hall to acknowledge our ancestors before preparing the betrothal gifts to be sent over, the sword replied. The matrimony of the Matthews and the Natalie clan was extremely important. Initially, they had still been a little worried about how it would go, especially considering that the young prodigy was missing, and the princess was reluctant. Such unhappiness could eventually culminate into a tragedy. Since all those problems had been resolved and both parties were intent on getting together, it would be best to put them together as soon as possible. Very well. I'll head back to make preparations as well. Clarence chuckled before bidding his farewell and leaving. All right, we should be making a move. The sword turned to Xavier with an expectant smile. Knowing that his father was inviting him back to the Matthews clan to acknowledge the ancestors, Xavier hesitated for a moment, but eventually he still nodded in agreement. Since his previous self was really the young prodigy of the Matthews clan, there was no qualms with him acknowledging the ancestors of the Matthews clan. Besides, he had a very favorable view of his parents. He wasn't too certain how the relationship between a parent and a child should be like, but he could feel how protective they were of him. He was also fond of their decisive character, never allowing conventions or formalities to blindly guide their actions. Just as the group was about to leave, Elder Clay suddenly stepped forward and bellowed, "Hold on a moment, you can't leave yet." "What's wrong?" The sword turned around and directed a hostile frown at Elder Clay. "He's only resolved the problem concerning the three powers, but the conflict between him and the Master-Teacher Pavilion hasn't been resolved yet," Elder Clay exclaimed. "Look at the mess that his students have caused. The head of the Poison Hall, Gia, has poisoned so many experts of our Master-Teacher Pavilion, and the leader of the Spirit Awakener Guild, Rose, has enchanted all of the Master-Teacher Pavilions in the area, resulting in massive losses on our part. How should we settle this problem? Indeed, there is also the matter of the Pavilion Master Seal. Clan Head Xavier, I have to request you return it to me. This concerns the honor and prestige of our Master-Teacher Pavilion," Ren added. Hearing the other party demanding the return of the Pavilion Master Seal, Xavier's face twitched slightly. He turned to Gia and the others and said, "Gia, release the poison that you've placed on these Master Teachers. And Rose, get your Spirit Awakeners to place all of the buildings back to where they belong. As for the Pavilion Master Seal, pardon me, but I can't return it to you yet." "You can't return it to me? Why?" Ren frowned in displeasure.
Rest assured, since no one's able to tame the Pavilion Master Seal, no one will bother to steal it from him either. I really have no idea how you can find the courage in you to talk about honor and prestige after sullying my son's innocence. Come back to ask for it after you've reinstated his master-teacher identity and restored his reputation. St. Lana interjected impatiently.
You! Ren glared at St. Lana furiously.
Pavilion Master Ren, we must reinstate his master-teacher identity. A master-teacher must be virtuous in order to serve as a role model for the rest of the world. Just the fact that he dared pass off as Master K's student shows that he has absolutely no regard for the sanctity of lineage at all. We cannot let someone who has blatantly crossed the rules of the Master-Teacher Pavilion remain as a master-teacher.
Elder Clay argued vehemently. But before he could finish his words, the space ahead suddenly warped, and two figures came into appearance. One of them was an elder, Master K.
Master K, you came at the perfect time. Xavier over here has claimed to be your student, and not only so, he even attempted to pass off as you and...
Seeing that it was Master K, Elder Clay immediately called out excitedly, only to see Master K walking up to Xavier and bowing with a clasped fist. Senior.
Senior!
It was as if a bolt of lightning had struck Elder Clay and his body wobbled unstably. What the hell was going on? Master K was not only the strongest cultivator in the entire Master-Teacher Pavilion headquarters, but he was also considered the most senior of them all as well. Despite being the Deputy Pavilion Master, even Ren still had to address Master K as his senior. One thing that Master K was known for was how forbidding he could become when it came to rules and formalities. So, Elder Clay had thought that the other party would fly into a rage and teach Xavier a lesson once he heard of this matter. But Master K simply walked straight up to Xavier, bowed, and addressed him as senior. Ren also nearly keeled over after hearing those words.
Having students as the head of the Combat Master Hall, Chief of the Glacier Plain Court, Master of the Poison Hall, and leader of the Spirit Awakener Guild, fine, I can accept that. His true identity being the head of the Matthews clan. All right, there really might be such a coincidence in the world, but having Master K address him as his senior, what the hell?
Having served as the Deputy Pavilion Master for several centuries, he had seen all kinds of geniuses and experts, but this was the first time he had seen someone like this. To be honest, he had intended for the Master-Teacher Pavilion to be the first one to get to Xavier, so that he could force the young man to spit out his secret to advancing his cultivation so swiftly. As for whether the young man should be punished or not, that was just a secondary concern of inconsequential importance. However, in the end, not only did he suffer trauma after trauma, but the other party even became his senior in the blink of an eye. To have a 20-year-old boy as his senior, something felt very off. The Sword and St. Lana traded gazes too, and they couldn't help but gulp in shock. They had thought that the greatest surprises were already over, but from the looks of it, what they had encountered previously was nothing at all. To actually be Master K's senior, that was truly wild. If that was the case, would that not put them a generation more senior than Master K? Paying no heed to the astounded crowd, Xavier shot a glance at the plump man following behind Master K, and after confirming that the latter was still fine, he heaved a sigh of relief.
Young Master, I thought that I would never see you again.
Upon seeing Xavier, Roach immediately rushed forward with tears running down his face. It might just have been a single day, but not once in his life had he ever felt so frightened and helpless before. When he heard Master K say that the old master didn't truly exist, he realized that he had been living in a web of lies all along. All of the confidence that he had built up collapsed in an instant, and his mind had nearly broken down. He had no idea how he had arrived at the Master-Teacher Pavilion headquarters, but he had found himself surrounded by many 9-star master teachers. Their words wielded some compelling power, forcing him to cultivate according to their words, and eventually his cultivation had ended up going berserk. He had thought that he would really meet his end then, but who could have known that Master K would return at that moment? This time, Master K was much more amiable than before. Without the severity in his voice, the other party told him warmly that he had made a mistake and that his young master was actually his senior. In that instant, Roach felt as if he had been pulled out from the abyss of despair and placed on Cloud 9. All those twists had happened one after another so quickly that he almost felt as if it was all a dream. If not for the fact that they were in the Master Teacher Pavilion headquarters, he would have really thought that the Master K whom he had met there was a fake. Seeing that the fellow had grown slightly plumper compared to when they last met, Xavier waved off Roach's agitation and instructed, "Make sure to cultivate properly in the future. Got it?" "Yes," Roach hurriedly nodded. Turning to his students, Xavier said, "Seth, I'll be leaving Roach in your hands. If he doesn't listen to your instructions, you're free to use the torture tools in the Combat Master Hall to force him to submit. Make sure to train him well." "Yes, teacher." Seth clasped his fist, after which he turned his gaze to Roach and chuckled softly. "Roach, this way, please." Hearing that he would have to cultivate, Roach's agitation swiftly waned, and it didn't take long for him to become completely spiritless. After dealing with Roach, Xavier turned to Master K and said, "I've troubled you, Junior." "There's no need to be so formal. It's my pleasure to be able to do something for you," Master K replied. Seeing how the #1 expert in the world was so courteous to Xavier, the Sword Saint remained in their stunned state. "You're too polite." Given that he was a Celestial Master Teacher, Xavier wasn't too surprised by the incredibly respectful attitude that Master K was treating him with. However, he shot a glance toward the latter to gesture for him to be low profile. The sharp Master K swiftly understood the gesture, and his face reddened a little, after which he turned his gaze to Sarah and nodded in amazement. "Incredible. Senior, your means are indeed formidable. It hasn't been long since I left, but Sarah's already fully recovered, and her cultivation's even advanced a notch." He had checked on Sarah personally, and he knew that all of her life energy paths had ruptured. Even with his abilities, he would have had no way of treating her at all. Yet, this senior of his had only taken less than a day to completely heal her. As expected of a Celestial Master Teacher, his means were indeed unfathomable. Xavier was silent for a moment before recalling that he had not resolved the problem concerning the Pavilion Master Seal yet. He turned back to Ren and said, "Pavilion Master Ren, it's not that I don't want to return the Pavilion Master Seal to you, but I was the one who asked my senior to take possession of the Pavilion Master Seal," Master K abruptly interjected. "Ren, you issued an arrest warrant without careful investigation, placing the Master Teacher Pavilion's impartiality and capability under question. With what you have done, if you continue holding on to the Pavilion Master Seal, you will only diminish the Master Teacher Pavilion's authority and honor." I understand." Knowing that he was at fault for this matter as well, Ren could only shake his head. He beckoned the elders behind him and said, "Let's go." After mobilizing such a huge group of 9-star master teachers simultaneously, who would have thought that the matter would end in such a manner? "Hold it right there." The master teachers barely managed to move a few steps before the crowd from the Combat Master Hall abruptly surrounded all of them. Ren turned to Seth and asked with a livid expression, "Progeny of Combat, what do you mean by this?" "Well, you did manage to resolve your issues, but my teacher's matter isn't over yet. You pinned such a grievous crime on my teacher, ordered his arrest, and even attempted to take his life. If we hadn't come in time, you would have already killed him in cold blood. After sullying my teacher's reputation, trampling on his dignity, and trying to assassinate him. Don't you think that it's too convenient for you to leave just like that? Seth glanced at the master teachers coldly as the spear in his hand trembled with a buzz.
Just because our teacher is compassionate enough to forgive the Master Teacher Pavilion doesn't mean that the rest of us are magnanimous enough to allow them. If you do not give us a good explanation today, do not even dream of taking a single step out of here.
Gia stepped forward as her poison aura billowed around her. The Master Teacher Pavilion might have chosen to drop the arrest warrant on Xavier after he came to a peaceful agreement with the three powers. But that didn't change the fact that the Master Teacher Pavilion had incompetently framed their teacher of crimes that he didn't commit, sullying his innocence. There was no way that they could allow them to get away that easily. Otherwise, their teacher's reputation would forever be stained by this incident. Since they had gathered together to bring their teacher justice, they should go all the way. Otherwise, what if others attempted it again in the future? After those two spoke up, Sarah, Rose, Lars, and the others also walked over to encircle the master teachers. Powerful auras burst forth from them, sending a clear message to the Master Teacher Pavilion that they would not be allowed to leave until they gave a satisfactory answer. Ren's face twitched upon seeing this sight. When had the Master Teacher Pavilion headquarters fallen so far as to be cornered in such a manner? "Just what do you want?" a 9-star Master Teacher bellowed furiously.
"Nothing much. We just want you to apologize. And the apology must reach every single Master Teacher Pavilion on the continent. Also, throw in 10 million or so Pinnacle Spirit Stones and we'll let this matter go,"
Alan said.
10 million or so Pinnacle Spirit Stones?
The 9-star Master Teacher from before nearly exploded. "This is
daylight robbery!"
The other 9-star Master Teachers also glared at Alan furiously. Pinnacle Spirit Stones were an extremely rare commodity, such that not even the Master Teacher Pavilion headquarters had the ability to take out 10 million or so Pinnacle Spirit Stones. In their eyes, Alan's request was an insult.
Daylight robbery? Well, how could that be? We're all very reasonable people, and there's no way we'd resort to something as despicable as that.
Chuckling softly, Alan turned around and said,
"Comrades, if they aren't able to take out that many Pinnacle Spirit Stones, let's just make do with taking their storage rings. While their Master Teacher robes are specially tailored by headquarters and are bound to be very expensive, let's spare their dignity and not strip them clean, all right? Well, after all, we are reasonable people, not common thieves."
"You." Hearing those words, the crowd from the Master Teacher Pavilion headquarters nearly blacked out. Unable to take it any longer, Ren turned to the young man watching the scene from afar and bellowed,
"Master Xavier, is this your intention as well?"
"All right, you lot should stop messing around." Seeing how mischievous his students were being, Xavier waved his hands helplessly and said, "Junior Ren, pardon me. It seems like I failed to keep my students in line."
"Junior?"
Ren's goosebumps rose upon hearing that term. "The matter regarding the storage rings is, of course, a joke. However," placing his hands behind his back, Xavier said, "I stand by what my students have said. I've always lived by my principles. I wouldn't be so brazen as to say that I've never faulted, but I've always tried my best to uphold the virtues of being a teacher. Yet, the Master Teacher Pavilion headquarters has issued an arrest warrant on me, making me out to be an immoral villain who willfully caused damage and kidnapped others. If the Master Teacher Pavilion simply walks away after all the mistakes it's committed, I think that would really chill the hearts of the Master Teachers around the world."
"You... Harry... Well, I admit that I've done you wrong this time around, and I'm willing to accept my punishment. Speak your mind. As long as it is something that the Master Teacher Pavilion can afford, I will try my best to compensate you."
As furious as Ren was, he knew that what Xavier had said was right. Thus, he suppressed his anger and lowered his head. I won't ask of you to compensate me, but it happens that there is something that the Master Teacher Pavilion headquarters has that I am deeply interested in. Having governed the Master Teacher continent for many years, the Master Teacher Pavilion has amassed countless cultivation technique manuals. To be honest, I've long desired to access your collection to further my studies. If the Master Teacher Pavilion would be so kind as to provide me with a copy of all of its cultivation technique manuals from the Dimension Sundering Realm to just before the Ancient Sage Realm, I would be extremely thankful, Xavier said. To him, no compensation was as practical as cultivation technique manuals. With those, he would be able to compile corresponding Heaven's Path Divine Art manuals and advance his cultivation swiftly. The cultivation technique manuals of the Master Teacher Pavilion are confidential, so I cannot show them to an outsider. I will have to ask you to request something else of me, Ren replied. One of the reasons that the Master Teacher Pavilion was able to remain at the top of the continent for so many years was due to its massive repository of top-notch secret arts. Knowledge would only be powerful in the right hands. So, the Master Teacher Pavilion only imparted the cultivation technique manuals to those with exceptional talent and good character. Furthermore, most of those secret arts were too domineering, such that without the guidance of the predecessors, not only would it be unlikely for one to master them, but the chances of one's cultivation going berserk were extremely high as well. Even a 9-star master teacher would have to study the insights of the predecessors before carefully practicing them bit by bit. Thus, there had never been an occasion when all of the secret arts were copied down and given to someone. I won't demand those cultivation techniques that are too profound or confidential. I'll just take those that the Master Teacher Pavilion is willing to impart to others. But I want as many of them as possible, Xavier said. While Master Teachers did embrace the idea of impartation to all without discrimination, there were limitations to how far they could do so. Most of the confidential secret arts passed down only within the lineages were extremely profound, and they would require special guidance in order to master. Carelessly passing on their secret arts to others would only encourage others to incorrectly practice the secrets that they've devoted their lives to developing and refining, and that was not something that they wanted to see. Back then, Keith Cole had taught 3,000 students and 72 direct disciples, and the cultivation techniques that he had imparted to each of them were different from one another. The same went for Rose, Seth, and the others. In fact, when Xavier lectured all of them together back when they were still at Anglewood Academy, he'd only imparted the most basic knowledge concerning cultivation to them. Beyond that, he had always chosen to tutor each of them individually. Hearing that Xavier didn't require the more confidential cultivation techniques, Ren hesitated for a moment before nodding.
Very well, then. However, I would like to inform you beforehand that the Master Teacher Pavilion only has Saint Level 8 and Level 9 cultivation technique manuals. Beyond the Saint Realm, every cultivator has to find their own way to forge a path forward, so there aren't any established cultivation techniques anymore. Furthermore, all of the cultivation technique manuals beyond the Saint Realm that our Master Teacher Pavilion has are locked in the Azure Vault. If you wish to browse through it, you will have to enter the premises yourself.
Hearing those words, Xavier shot a glance at the sword, and the latter confirmed Ren's words with a slight nod. Thus, he could only turn his gaze back and sigh helplessly.
All right, then. We have quite a number of Saint Level 8 cultivation technique manuals on hand, so we can pass them over to you right now. As for Saint Level 9 manuals, most of them are in the Master Teacher Pavilion headquarters, so you will have to wait patiently as we copy them for you,
Ren said. Considering the standing of the Master Teacher Pavilion, they wouldn't stoop so low as to renege on their own words. Thus, Xavier gave a nod of agreement. I understand. So, Ren turned around and instructed,
Everyone, please pass all of the Saint Level 8 cultivation technique manuals that you have to me.
Yes, Pavilion Master Red.
The 9-star master teachers hurriedly took out their Saint Level 8 cultivation technique manuals, adding up to several thousand books. Ren stowed the books into his storage ring before passing it to Xavier.
Master Xavier, I will take responsibility for the injustice that you have experienced today. Once I return to the Master Teacher Pavilion headquarters, I will resign from my position as the Deputy Pavilion Master. I hope that this will be able to resolve the grudge that you have with the Master Teacher Pavilion.
Knee-deep in this mess, the Master Teacher Pavilion could no longer make a clean getaway from this matter. In order to restore the dignity and reputation of the Master Teacher Pavilion, Ren had no choice but to shoulder all of the blame. But once he did that, there was no way that others would allow him to remain as the Deputy Pavilion Master. Rather than be criticized by the masses afterward, he decisively chose that he would resign from his position. After bowing deeply to Xavier and Master K, Ren left with all of the 9-star Master Teachers. On the other hand, Xavier hadn't expected Ren to actually resign from his position over this matter, and he shook his head and sighed. At that moment, he suddenly recalled Master K's abrupt interjection earlier, so he turned a doubtful gaze over to the latter. Junior, he hadn't told the other party anything about the Pavilion Master Seal, so why would the other party suddenly speak up on his behalf? Knowing what he was about to ask, Master K sent a telepathic message over. As a Celestial Master Teacher, you should be able to easily tame the Pavilion Master Seal. The reason you're unwilling to hand it over is because you've already tamed it, and it's already fused into your palm in the form of 3 droplets. Right? Xavier nodded. It seemed like Master K did know about the Pavilion Master Seal, so there was no need for him to waste his breath explaining the matter to him. Through the power of those droplets, you'll be able to wield power unmatched by those beneath Ancient Sage. If I'm not mistaken, you were planning to reveal your identity as a Celestial Master Teacher earlier, right? Master K continued. Xavier nodded before asking, Is there anything wrong with that? The reason he had not dared to reveal his identity as a Celestial Master Teacher before was that he'd been too weak. He had been afraid that the otherworldly demonic tribe would devote its efforts to assassinating him once they learned of the matter, and he didn't feel safe in trusting his safety to others. However, having tamed the Pavilion Master Seal, as long as he activated the power of the droplets, he would be able to wield strength unmatched by all beneath Ancient Sage. Surely it should be okay for him to reveal his identity as the Celestial Master Teacher with the strength he currently possessed, right? After all, he would be granted access to the massive trove of resources that the Master Teacher Pavilion had once he revealed his identity, thus allowing him to advance his cultivation faster than ever. Was there really a need for him to continue concealing the matter? Senior, I know what you're thinking, and I'll be very frank with you. We've recently found out that one of the strongest otherworldly demonic emperors is currently on the Master Teacher continent, Master K said grimly. At this point, we're still unable to confirm the intention behind this course of action. However, if the news concerning you being the Celestial Master Teacher is leaked now, there's no doubt that you will be in grave danger. Grave danger? But how powerful is the otherworldly demonic emperor? Xavier asked. He was invincible among those beneath Ancient Sage, and while he wasn't too sure of the matter, it seemed like it was impossible for any cultivators to make a breakthrough to Ancient Sage anymore. With that, there should be no one on the Master Teacher continent who was more powerful than him. I'm afraid that the otherworldly demonic emperor's cultivation has already reached. Master K looked in the sky with an apprehensive frown on his face. Ancient Sage. Ancient Sage. Xavier narrowed his eyes in shock, not daring to believe what he had heard. Didn't you say that it's now impossible for anyone to make a breakthrough to the Ancient Sage realm? Previously, Master K had stated that it was no longer possible for anyone to make a breakthrough to Ancient Sage. Even he himself had reached a bottleneck in his cultivation, and the reason he had chosen to roam the world was to search for inspiration that could possibly allow him to make a breakthrough. Since that was the case, how could that otherworldly demonic emperor be so powerful?
When I say that he's reached ancient sage, I fear that's only a conservative estimate on my part.
Master K shook his head worriedly.
There's a good chance that his cultivation is far higher than that.
Seeing that Xavier was confused by the seeming contradiction in his words, Master K paused for a moment before explaining.
It is true that it's nearly impossible for human cultivators to make a breakthrough to ancient sage anymore, but the otherworldly demons are of a different level of existence from us humans. Given the difference in our constitutions, how they achieve breakthroughs is drastically different from how we break through. So I can't say for sure whether they're still able to make a breakthrough to ancient sage or not. However, I can tell you for certain that this particular otherworldly demonic emperor hasn't made a breakthrough in the last 10,000 years.
What do you mean by that? Xavier was still unable to make sense out of what he was hearing. If the otherworldly demonic emperor hadn't made a breakthrough in the past 10,000 years, did that not mean that the other party had already been an ancient sage 10,000 years before? But surely that couldn't be. As powerful as ancient sages were, there was still a limit to their lifespan. Otherwise, Keith Cole and his disciples wouldn't have disappeared without a trace either.
In fact, I suspect that this otherworldly demonic emperor could very well be the same one that fought with Keith Cole back then,
Master K said with narrowed eyes. The one that fought with Keith Cole back then? This... Xavier's eyes widened in shock. But Keith Cole departed from this continent tens of thousands of years ago. No? Was it really possible for the otherworldly demonic emperor who had fought with Keith Cole tens of thousands of years ago to still be alive?
In the first place, the otherworldly demons enjoy greater longevity than us humans, and they might have used some sort of secret art that allows them to hibernate for long periods of time. As such, we cannot discount the possibility that this otherworldly demonic emperor is still alive,
Master K explained.
In fact, there are many powerhouses of the Master Teacher continent that have lived through the ages in such a way as well.
These words immediately stirred up a great storm in Xavier's heart. It seemed like he had underestimated the ancient sages. He had thought that once a person reached the limits of their lifespan, whether they were a human or an otherworldly demon, they had no choice but to accept their death. Who would have thought that there would actually be such a secret art to extend their lifespan? Then again, Vicious was the very embodiment of this. He had fought with Keith Cole back then, but even tens of thousands of years later, he had still successfully been brought back to life. He had no idea how powerful Vicious was in the otherworldly demonic tribe, but considering the high opinion that Master K had of that otherworldly demonic emperor, they should be of equal standing, at the very least. Given so, it shouldn't come as much of a surprise that this otherworldly demonic emperor was still alive.
My guess is that this otherworldly demonic emperor has snuck into the Master Teacher continent for the Great Codex of Spring and Autumn. Currently, not even the Master Teacher Pavilion headquarters has been able to acquire any information concerning his whereabouts. As such, it would be best to remain prudent. You are only mankind's second celestial Master Teacher, and if that otherworldly demonic emperor catches wind of your existence, I'm afraid that it will be difficult for us to stop him with our current strength,
Master K said worriedly. I understand. Xavier nodded. Given that he had hidden his identity as the Celestial Master Teacher for so long, he had no qualms with keeping it a secret a little bit longer. Just that he really didn't expect the otherworldly demonic tribe to still have such a powerful expert among them. But if the otherworldly demonic emperor is that powerful, and the Master Teacher continent no longer has any ancient sages, why hasn't the otherworldly demonic tribe conquered us yet? It's their dream, isn't it? Considering that mankind was already without Keith Cole and his disciples, it shouldn't be too difficult for that ancient sage, otherworldly demonic emperor, to lead his men over to conquer the Master Teacher continent once more. That should be the rational course of action, should it not?
Oh, they've tried to invade the Master Teacher continent many times, but it isn't as easy as that. While it's possible for the otherworldly demons to slip through the seals in the subterranean galleries, they have to pay a heavy price for that. As such, it isn't easy for them to amass their armies on the Master Teacher continent, Master K explained. Furthermore, while no humans have been able to achieve a breakthrough to Ancient Sage anymore, that doesn't mean that we don't have any Ancient Sages among us.
What? Xavier blinked blankly, not following Master K's word. If it was impossible to achieve a breakthrough to Ancient Sage, how could there still be any human Ancient Sage cultivators in the world?
Well, didn't I say it earlier? There are many powerhouses on the Master Teacher continent that have used a secret art to survive through the ages. In fact, the reason even the Master Teacher Pavilion headquarters has to tread prudently around the Matthews clan is because the Matthews clan also has an ancient sage who has survived in such a way. However, the ancient sages are in a state of hibernation most of the time, and only when the Master Teacher continent is truly in danger will they be awakened, Master K replied.
The Matthews clan has an ancient sage. Xavier was shocked. He had always thought that the strongest experts in the Matthews clan were the Sword and St. Lana. Who could have thought that they would actually have such a powerful trump card?
Indeed, this is one of the greatest secrets of the continent, and only 9-star Master Teachers are qualified to learn of this matter. Senior, I have to ask you not to speak of it lightly to others.
Master K clasped his fist. Rest assured, I understand, Xavier replied.
The ancient sages of mankind are usually in a state of hibernation, and they're woken only when there's a battle to be fought, and they return to hibernation right after. For every battle they undergo, their lifespan is reduced significantly. Eventually, they will run out of time and breathe their last breath. Every single ancient sage is of the utmost importance to the safety of mankind, so we cannot afford to wake any of them up in order to protect you. Since your identity as a Celestial Master Teacher hasn't been leaked yet, it would be best to keep it a secret for as long as we can. Furthermore, we still have no idea what the otherworldly demonic emperor looks like, where he currently is, and in what form the danger from him will manifest. Even if we had an ancient sage constantly following you around, it would still be difficult to guarantee your safety.
Speaking up to this point, Master K suddenly paused for a moment as he looked at Xavier earnestly.
Any of us can die, but Senior, you must continue living. You are the Celestial Master Teacher, an existence on par with Keith Cole. You are the hope of mankind. Whether mankind will be able to rise once more and enter another era of prosperity depends on you.
Xavier's heart jolted in astonishment. He didn't think that Master K would have such a high opinion of him. He was silent for a moment before nodding. I understand. At the same time, he felt incredibly relieved that he had never revealed his identity as the Celestial Master Teacher carelessly. Otherwise, if he had really caught the eye of that otherworldly demonic emperor whom Master K had mentioned, he probably would have been killed in a heartbeat. Junior, you said earlier that this otherworldly demonic emperor is likely come for the Great Codex of Spring and Autumn. Can you explain more about that matter? Xavier asked. The Great Codex of Spring and Autumn was known to be the strongest artifact that Keith Cole had created, and it wielded unimaginable capabilities. Previously, he had come across the Cryon Emperor, who had been searching for a celestial amulet of legacy for this very purpose.
As you might have heard, the Great Codex of Spring and Autumn is an unparalleled artifact that Keith Cole left behind. It has the ability to affect the weather and control time. And before Keith Cole left the continent, he placed the artifact in the Temple of Confucius in Corfu. Unfortunately, no one knows the exact location of where the Temple of Confucius is anymore. Countless master teachers have attempted to find it, but none of them succeeded. Legend has it that only by gathering all of the celestial amulets of legacy together will the road leading to the Temple of Confucius finally appear. However, a year ago, we detected some spatial distortions in Corfu, and someone reportedly witnessed a mirage of the Temple of Confucius. As soon as that news came out, it caused a huge commotion among the upper echelons of the Master Teacher Continent. The Master Teacher Pavilion moved quickly to seal the news completely, but unfortunately, it seems like the otherworldly demonic tribe still managed to catch wind of it. The Great Codex of Spring and Autumn is an unparalleled treasure, and if we successfully obtain it, we'll have a powerful weapon in our hands to protect ourselves. However, if the otherworldly demonic tribe obtains it instead, there's a good chance they could use it to tear down the seals in the subterranean galleries and march back onto the continent. If that happens, it will be a catastrophe, Master K said grimly.
If it's an artifact that Keith Cole forged, why did he choose to seal it in the Temple of Confucius instead of entrusting it to the Master Teacher Pavilion? Xavier asked with a doubtful frown. Since it was a creation of Keith Cole, it went without saying that he intended it to be passed down to future generations to benefit mankind. Yet, instead of handing this artifact over to the Master Teacher Pavilion to use, he chose to seal it up instead. This didn't seem to make sense.
I don't know the exact reason either. Most likely we'll only know after entering the Temple of Confucius, Master K said.
A matter concerning the Temple of Confucius was already way beyond what Master K could access. The matter had happened tens of thousands of years ago, and no matter how carefully the Master Teacher Pavilion passed down its heritage from one generation to the next, there was still bound to be some information that was withheld or lost in the process. With the limited information he had, all he could do was speculate. And since it was just mere speculation, it would be better for him to hold his tongue than to spread uncertain information. On the other hand, seeing that Master K was uncertain of the matter, Xavier decided to ask no more as well. The two of them chatted a while longer before the Sword suddenly walked over and said, "Master K, we are very thankful to you for helping us reunite with our exam. We wish to bring him home now to acknowledge the ancestors. Would you be interested in following us along to witness the process?" Master K nodded. "I happen to have something that I have to do back at the Matthews clan. Let's head over together." "Great, let's set off then." Seeing that Master K was coming along as well, the Sword inwardly heaved a sigh of relief before turning to Xavier. "We'll first be heading to the Glacier Plain Court to teleport to the Master Teacher Pavilion headquarters before teleporting to the Matthews clan." "There's no need to go through that much trouble. I can just set up a teleportation formation straight back to the Matthews clan here," Xavier replied with a smile. While the power from the droplet had already faded, with his current Dimension Sundering Realm primary stage cultivation and the assistance from Master K and the Sword Saint, it wouldn't be too difficult for him to construct another teleportation formation. In any case, he had been to the Matthews clan once before, so he knew its coordinates very well. As long as he calculated carefully, he'd be able to arrive at the destination with pinpoint accuracy. But that would be great. It was only after hearing those words that the crowd suddenly remembered the young man's ability to set up teleportation formations with a wave of his hand, and they quickly nodded in agreement. "Before that, allow me to talk to my students for a while first." Since Xavier had already decided to head to the Matthews clan, there was no longer any need for him to hesitate. He quickly headed to where Sarah, Seth, and the others had gathered. "Teacher." With the crisis resolved, they were no longer able to suppress the longing that they felt, and they quickly gathered around Xavier in agitation. If not for their teacher, most of them would still have been living their lives groggily in the remote Olmec kingdom. They would have never grown to become the formidable powerhouses that they were that day. They would never forget what their teacher had done for them. Not bad. Looking at the faces before him, Xavier couldn't help but smile hearteningly. Those immature children that had waddled behind him in the past had become figures who could stand their own ground. There was indeed nothing constant in the world except for the passing of time. After chatting for a bit, Xavier turned to the spear-wielding young man and asked, "Seth, how did you manage to grow so quickly?" Gia had been able to advance her cultivation swiftly due to her innate poison constitution, and the same applied to Sarah, Lars, and Alan as well. While Rose had improved considerably, her strength was mainly derived from her spirit enchantment art and the puppet that she commanded. Yet, it was Seth who only had hard work to count on who had improved the quickest among them, such that even Ren would hesitate to face him. "Teacher, I only managed to improve so quickly due to the Master Teacher Pavilion's Hall of Spring and Autumn," Seth replied honestly. "Hall of Spring and Autumn?" Xavier muttered. "It's a unique artifact of the Master Teacher Pavilion headquarters, and it's said to have been left behind by Keith Cole as well. It's somewhat similar to the blood reservoir of the Matthews clan, but more advanced than that. A year inside the Hall of Spring and Autumn translates to only the passing of a month outside. I spent a total of 3 months inside, which is equivalent to the passing of 3 years, with the Combat Master Hall generously supplying whatever I needed for my cultivation," Seth said. "I see." Xavier nodded. It was no wonder the other party had grown so much within just a couple of months, such that even Sarah and the others weren't able to catch up to him. It turned out that the Master Teacher Pavilion headquarters still had such a formidable artifact with them. With the slowing of time, Seth's diligence, the heritage of the Combat Master Hall, and the vast resources devoted to him, it was understandable that he had grown so quickly within such a short period of time. The Matthews clan's blood reservoir only allowed one to cultivate mentally, but the effects of the Hall of Spring and Autumn applied to the cultivator as a whole. Naturally, there was a vast difference in the effects as well. As they chatted and chatted, before they knew it, the sky had already begun to dim. Seeing that it was getting late, Xavier said, "All of you are already leaders of your respective organizations, so you can't follow me as you did in the past anymore. Your people need you, so return to them. I'm not in danger anymore, so there's no need to be worried about me." He knew that his students missed him, and he missed them as well. However, their circumstances were different from before, and they couldn't afford to act willfully. They had each found their own way forward, so it was inevitable that their paths would have to diverge.
"We understand, but it's just that we can't bear to..."
The thought of separation after barely reuniting with one another made Sarah's eyes redden slightly. She had thought that she would be able to remain with her teacher a little longer, but to think that they would have to separate so soon again. "Sarah, even though I've helped you reconstruct your life energy paths, your foundations are still a little weak at the moment. Here's a cultivation technique manual that I've just written. Cultivate according to it, and it'll do you much good for your future cultivation. Seth, the heritage of the Combat Master Hall isn't too bad, but due to the swift advancement in your cultivation, you ended up incurring some traumas. I have a prescription over here. Get a skilled apothecary to forge the pills for you according to my prescription. Consume one a day for a week straight, and it should resolve the traumas that you've sustained and advance your cultivation further. Rose, your talent is lacking in comparison to Sarah and the others, and you haven't been blessed with the same fortuitous encounter as Seth. Here are the cultivation technique manuals that I've compiled for you recently, as well as the insights I have regarding spirit enchantment. I'll entrust all of them to you, and as long as you practice them diligently, you should be able to improve quickly as well." Xavier carefully went through the problems with each of his students' cultivation, but even after doing so, he still felt a little worried. Thus, he left several surges of Heaven's Path gleam in each of them before heaving a sigh of relief. They might have matured and grown even stronger than him. Somehow, he couldn't help but see them as children that needed care. Teacher, since you're intending to head to the Natalie clan very soon to seal your engagement, let's meet again there, Seth said with a smile. I'll bring a huge present then to celebrate the occasion. Indeed, how can we be absent for our teacher's marriage? Gia chuckled softly. We'll definitely be there. Sarah and the others nodded in agreement. Seeing the earnest faces all around him, Xavier shook his head helplessly and said, All right, feel free to come if you want to. Right. There's a matter that I need to entrust you all with. Jesse disappeared after leaving Cintran City, so I'd like you all to help me keep a lookout for him. If you find him, make sure that no danger befalls him. Recalling that disciple of his who had left to venture into the world, Xavier couldn't help but feel a little worried. All right. The others nodded in agreement. While they had been chatting, the elders of the Spirit Awakener Guild had already moved the enchanted buildings back to where they belonged, and the experts of the Poison Hall had also cured the poisoned master teachers and released them. By the time Xavier parted with his students, night had fallen. Let's go. Knowing that Xavier wasn't in the mood to chat, St. Lana didn't bother him too much. She took out a bunch of Grade 9 formation flags and passed them over. Taking the formation flags, Xavier quickly calculated the coordinates of the Matthews clan and began constructing the teleportation formation. Due to his lacking cultivation, he still needed Master K's assistance before he finally activated the teleportation formation successfully. The group vanished on the spot, and the next instant they were standing right before the Matthews clan's entrance formation. In the Natalie clan, before a massive seal, a young woman pleaded with a desperate look on her face. Brother, please let me go. I'll come back right after saving him. With her black, silky hair and a delicate complexion that looked as if it would tear with a gust of wind, she was indescribably beautiful, almost like a goddess that had descended to the mortal world. Standing before her was a young man in his early 30s. Joel. You should abandon that thought, Eva. The only reason I was allowed to return using the teleportation formation was to stop you from messing around. Looking into his younger sister's pleading eyes, Joel's heart ached a little. However, he still toughened his resolve and shook his head adamantly. He brought this upon himself. If he's able to survive this ordeal, I'll believe that he truly has the ability to marry you. However, there's no need for you to be too worried about him. Since the Master Teacher Pavilion has gotten involved, I don't think that they'll go too far. The very most, they'll only punish him harshly. There shouldn't be any threat to his life. Is that so? Hearing her elder brother's words, the young woman heaved a sigh of relief. As long as there's no danger to his life, I believe that he'll be able to overcome the crisis eventually. You... Jeez. I really don't know what kind of sorcery that lad used to charm you so. Staring at the infatuated look on his younger sister's face, Joel couldn't help but shake his head. He had interacted with Xavier on many occasions, so he had a clear idea about the means that the young man possessed. While he was formidable, faced against a behemoth like the Master Teacher Pavilion headquarters, it was unlikely that he would stand much of a chance. Even if there was no danger to the young man's life, chances were that he would be put through great suffering. He really couldn't understand why his younger sister had so much confidence in him. It's not sorcery, I simply trust him, the young woman replied. It doesn't matter whether you trust him or not. It's not as if you don't know our clan's resolve on this matter, and you should understand the severe implications that could arise from this matter. They won't allow you to marry anyone other than the young prodigy of the Matthews clan. There is no future between you and him. Joel sighed as he lowered his gaze to the ground, not wanting to see his younger sister's disappointed face. The deeper the feelings his younger sister had for that fellow, the greater the disappointment she would eventually face. The marriage between the Matthews clan and the Natalie clan would affect the Master Teacher Pavilion, the Celestial Amulets of Legacy, and the Great Codex of Spring and Autumn. They would not allow any problems to occur just because of her personal feelings.
I know. I know that there's no future between me and him. As long as he's safe, I'll be good.
The young woman replied quietly as she hugged her knees to her body. You... Jeez. Joel wanted to knock some sense into his younger sister, but seeing the forlorn look on her face, he really couldn't bring himself to put her down any more than that. She had always been lonely, despite the crowds of people that swarmed around her. It hadn't been easy for her to find someone she truly liked. Even if there was nothing but tragedy in the end, perhaps it might be good to allow her to live in the moment. In that moment of heavy silence between them, flurried footsteps sounded from a distance, and soon a figure could be seen rushing over.
Young master, princess.
Upon catching a clearer sight of the figure, Joel anxiously asked,
Elder Theo, what's wrong?
He was none other than the Natalie clan expert who had threatened Xavier back in Cintran City, Theo. His face was flushed red in agitation, as if he had heard some news that even he had difficulty believing.
Young master, I've been keeping a close eye on the situation over in the Empire Alliance, and I've just received some news from my men there. After Master Xavier was cornered by the experts of the Master Teacher Pavilion headquarters, there should have been no way that he could have escaped. However, at that crucial moment, his students appeared, Theo reported.
His students? Are you referring to Rose and the others?
The young woman asked anxiously.
Well, that's right. The first one to arrive was the head of the Poison Hall, followed by a Soul Oracle, the leader of the Spirit Awakener Guild.
As he reported the news he had just received, Theo couldn't help but gulp. He had verified the matter again and again, but still he couldn't help but find it too incredible to be true.
You're telling me that the students that fellow took in have become the head of the Poison Hall, the leader of the Spirit Awakener Guild, the master of the Combat Master Hall, the head of the Price Clan?
Joel widened his eyes in disbelief. Those were major powers that didn't pale much in comparison to the Natalie clan. And yet, they were all headed by Xavier's students. Was Xavier not only a phantasmal space realm cultivator himself? How could his students be so formidable?
That isn't all. The Sword and St. Lana from the Matthews clan also arrived shortly afterward, and Theo continued. After fighting an intense battle with Master Xavier, the Sword admitted his defeat and said that.
Seeing how Theo was stuttering to no end, Joel frowned in displeasure. What did he say?
He said that Master Xavier was actually his son. In other words, he's the young prodigy who hasn't appeared all this time.
Theo exclaimed with eyes widened in disbelief. When he first saw this piece of news, he had thought that his eyes were playing tricks on him. He had needed to carefully read it 8 times and verify it again and again before he was able to confirm that there was no mistake. Nevertheless, he still couldn't help but feel as if he was in a dream when speaking of it. It was simply too unbelievable. It had not been easy for the princess to find someone whom she fancied, but the heavy responsibility that she shouldered made it impossible for them to come together. Yet, who would have thought that her fiancé would turn out to be the person whom she fancied?
What did you say?
Joel fell into a daze. The princess's body also stiffened upon hearing those words. Her voice quivered in disbelief as she asked,
Did you say that Master Xavier is the young prodigy of the Matthews clan?
Yes. I verified the information many times, so there can't be any mistake with it. I've heard that our first elder is rushing back to the clan because of the matter, and I believe that it won't be long before news spreads all around our clan.
Theo nodded in agitation. He was the old butler of the princess, and he'd been taking care of her ever since she was young. Due to that, he had a clear idea of what her temperament was like. It was precisely out of worry for her that he secretly went to look for Xavier in order to warn him. He had thought that since it was impossible for them to get together, it would be better to sever their relationship as quickly as possible to lessen the pain. However, when he found out that the princess could really be together with the person whom she liked, the excitement that he felt was no different than what the two people in question felt.
That fellow actually is the young prodigy!
Unable to contain his agitation, Joel punched the air excitedly. In his head, the image of the young prodigy whom he had hated with a passion slowly overlapped together with Xavier's figure, and soon an indescribable sense of joy rippled through his body, washing away all of his fatigue. The reason he hated the young prodigy previously was because he knew that his younger sister was likely to suffer in this political marriage. Marrying someone she didn't love, she could come to regret it for life. However, if Xavier was the young prodigy, that would no longer be the case. They had mutual feelings for one another, and as an elder brother, it went without saying that his younger sister finding her own happiness was something worth celebrating.
Xavier.
Upon learning that the person whom she was engaged with was actually the person whom she fancied, the worries and hesitation that had plagued the young woman in recent days were suddenly swept clean. Before she knew it, her vision blurred. Tears were already streaming down her face. With the engagement between them, she would finally be able to be with him openly. There was no need for her to be afraid of anything anymore. All of a sudden, she remembered something and hurriedly wiped away her tears. She turned to Theo and asked nervously,
"How did he react after learning that he was the young prodigy of the Matthews clan?"
"Well, it goes without saying that he's overjoyed. It seems like he's even made a promise with our first elder that after acknowledging the ancestors of the Matthews clan, he'll immediately head over to ask for your hand in marriage," Theo said.
"He's heading over to ask for my hand in marriage."
The young woman's face instantaneously turned bright red, and her brilliant eyes reflected deep expectations for the future ahead.
"I'll be waiting."
As a newly promoted empire, the Goldring Empire didn't stand out among the many empires. However, it was one of the few empires that were extremely successful at attracting talents all over the world, allowing it to develop at an incredible pace. In just half a year, it had already become one of the more outstanding Tier 2 empires, well beyond the league of the Myriad Kingdom Alliance. At this very moment, Empress Monica was seated on her royal throne, assessing the crowd beneath her regally.
"Don't you all have a lot of opinions, usually? Why aren't any of you speaking today?"
One of the officials stepped forward and exclaimed,
"Your Majesty, we cannot afford to interfere recklessly in this matter. If we help Master Xavier, that would be equivalent to opposing the Master Teacher Pavilion. That could very well revert our newly promoted empire back into a mere kingdom." "I disagree with that viewpoint. Were it not for Master Xavier, our Goldring Kingdom would never have been successfully promoted into an empire. If we remain silent while our benefactor is being insulted by others, how will our people view us?"
said another official as he stepped forward.
"I'm of the same opinion as Lionel. If it had been another Master Teacher, we still might have been able to turn a blind eye to this matter. But it is Master Xavier that we are talking about here. Back then, he went to great lengths in order to develop our Goldring Kingdom into an empire, so we cannot simply leave him in the lurch now that he's in need of help. That would chill the hearts of our people."
"Given our strength, what can we possibly do for Master Xavier? Do you think that our Goldring Empire has the power to oppose a decision made by the Master Teacher Pavilion headquarters? We'll only be destroyed."
"Even if we cannot do anything much, I don't want others to view our Goldring Empire as an ungrateful country that forgets its benefactors."
"Oh, even if you wish to repay the debt, you can't just drag our entire Goldring Empire into the flames like that."
"Enough."
Looking at the chaos below, Empress Monica abruptly rose to her feet and bellowed,
"Master Xavier must be saved. This is my decision. Lionel, I want you to start a petition using my name and rally everyone in the Empire who is indebted to Master Xavier. So what if the other party is the Master Teacher Pavilion headquarters? If they have made a mistake, we ought to speak up against it." "Yes,
Hearing that the Empress had already made her decision, the arguing officials lowered their heads subserviently, not daring to argue anymore.
Your Majesty,
just as Lionel was about to begin drafting a petition, a fully armored general rushed into the palace and anxiously reported,
I have just received news that Mr. Xavier has managed to resolve the crisis and is fine. You said that Mr. Xavier is fine.
Monica hurriedly took the letter in his hand and opened it. Slowly, her eyes widened in disbelief.
Mr. Xavier is actually the head of one of the premier sage clans, the Matthews clan. And Sarah is the court chief of the Glacier Plain Court, wielding strength that even Pavilion Master Wren had trouble dealing with. That lass, Rose, has become the leader of the Spirit Awakener Guild. Seth is the new progeny of the Combat Master Hall. And that fatty, Alan, has actually become the head of the Price Clan. Even Lars has grown into a Master Soul Oracle, capable of standing his ground against 9-star Master Teachers.
Monica couldn't help but wonder in her heart,
if I had relinquished my royalty and followed him back then, would I have already become a top-notch expert of the continent too?
Back then, Sarah, Rose, Seth, and the others had been far weaker than her, not even coming close to being a match for her. Yet, in the short span of a single year, they had become figures whom she could only look up to. She had known all along that it was only a matter of time before someone of Master Xavier's caliber rose to the top. But who could have thought that even his students would become experts standing at the zenith of the continent as well? Monica lowered her head with a hint of sorrow in the depths of her eyes.
It is a pity, but it seems like I have already missed my opportunity to do so.
She had viewed being the Empress of the Gold Ring Empire as a great honor, but it was becoming apparent that even this honor might not come close to being a humble student of Xavier's. Monica shook her head and muttered,
"It looks like the Master Teacher continent will be Mr. Xavier's in the future."
White clouds drifted amid the mountain range. By a mountain stream, a young woman was seated atop a small boulder with a worried look in her eyes. Eloise. Shortly after leaving Cintran City, Eloise stumbled upon 9-star Master Teacher Dawn and became her student.
Junior, our teacher told me to bring this letter to you.
A young man suddenly flew over from the distance and placed an envelope in her hand. Eloise anxiously tore it open, and upon swiftly browsing through it, her body stiffened in shock.
If he's the young prodigy of the Matthews clan, doesn't that mean that...
Indeed, Junior, Xavier is indeed a person of great talent. Not only does he possess extraordinary abilities, but all of his students are outstanding. Even our teacher is filled with respect and praise for him, the young man exclaimed. It won't be long before his name is known throughout the entire continent.
Yes, you're right,
Eloise replied with a dazed look, seemingly contemplating something deeply. In the Adonis clan, a middle-aged man turned around with a flabbergasted look on his face after hearing an elder's report.
You said that Xavier single-handedly fended off the pursuers from the Master Teacher Pavilion headquarters, and in the blink of an eye, he became the head of the Matthews clan. Furthermore, his students are also powerhouses of the continent, possessing great power too. Is that right, Clanhead? Prepare some gifts and send them over to the Matthews clan to congratulate them for finding their son. Wait. They are intending to head to the Natalie clan to ask for the princess's hand in marriage, right? Deliver the present straight to the Natalie clan and relay my blessings to them. No. That we not do either. The middle-aged man waved his hand grandly. I shall make the trip personally.
In the Smythe clan, Master Murphy had been kneeling outside a manor, not moving in the slightest. In order to be accepted back into his clan, he had been kneeling for 10 days straight, but not a single person had bothered to pay him any heed. Even when he tried to beg with the butler, the latter had simply disregarded him. He had never faced such treatment back when he was still a genius from the Smythe clan. However, he couldn't complain about it. He knew that he was the one who had done wrong back then. As long as the Smythe clan was willing to take him back, putting aside 10 days, he would wait for as long as he needed to. Enduring the fatigue in his body, Master Murphy gritted his teeth tightly. Just as he was about to reach his limit, the massive doors of the Smythe clan manor suddenly creaked open, and the head of the Smythe clan rushed out.
Quick, get up!
The clan head quickly walked over to Master Murphy to help him up before feeding him a recovery pill. As soon as he swallowed the pill, Master Murphy immediately felt incredible energy coursing through his body. In an instant, the fatigue that he had accumulated over the past few days vanished without a trace.
This is a grade 9 pill.
Master Murphy jolted in alarm. Even when he was still a genius of the Smythe clan, he hadn't been qualified to consume such pills. Yet, after his heinous deeds, the head of the Smythe clan had still fed such a pill to him.
Master Murphy, I have looked through your experiences over these many years, and I have noticed that you were under Master Xavier's care for some time. All right, then. I will allow you to return to the Smythe clan and grant you a suitable position within the clan. Master Xavier will be heading to the Natalie clan to ask for the princess's hand in marriage, so I want you to head over to represent our Smythe clan and present him with our congratulatory gifts, the clan head said with a smile.
Master Xavier? Which Master Xavier? Master Murphy was a little overwhelmed by the situation.
Who else could I be referring to other than Xavier Matthews? You probably haven't heard yet. He is actually the young prodigy of the Matthews clan as well as its clan head, the clan head replied.
Master Xavier has become the head of the Matthews clan, and he's actually the young prodigy at that.
Master Murphy was stunned. All of a sudden, he understood the reason behind the clan head's abrupt change in attitude. It turned out that the turning point of the matter was his link with Master Xavier. It was Master Xavier who had changed the course of his destiny. The same scene was playing out among most powers in the top echelons of the Master Teacher continent. On that day, there was a name that was imprinted in the minds of all those across the Master Teacher continent. Everyone had come to know of the Master Teacher named Xavier Matthews. Some were delighted to learn of the matter, some despaired after hearing about it, and some were simply nonchalant. But, without a doubt, his name would continue to resound across the Master Teacher continent for many years to come. Seeing the newly repaired buildings and halls before him, the sword exclaimed with a smile, "We're home." It should have been the same Matthews clan as before, but it didn't seem that way to Xavier anymore. A few days ago, when he came over, the only thought on his mind had been to teach the young prodigy a lesson and give the Matthews clan a piece of his mind. However, when he learned that the young prodigy was actually him, and the Matthews clan that he had hated all along was actually his clan, honestly, he still wasn't too sure how he should feel about the matter.
If only we'd found you earlier, this mess wouldn't have occurred.
Recalling the tragedy that he had witnessed when he returned to the Matthews clan back then, the sword couldn't help but shake his head. With Xavier's current standing, no member of the Matthews clan would dare oppose him anymore. However, due to the events before, it was inevitable that most members of the Matthews clan would have some reservations or even bear hostility toward him.
Isn't this fine, too? St. Lana harumphed coldly. Your Matthews clan's grown arrogant over the years, acting all high and mighty just because of that #1 Sage Clan title. I've always despised that of the Matthews clan. I'd say that our Xav did well stirring them up a little. That'll make them learn that the bloodline that they're so proud of isn't even worth mentioning.
The sword knew better than to argue with his hot-tempered wife at this moment, so he could only shake his head helplessly and concede defeat.
Yes, my dear, you're always right.
With the sword at the lead, the group managed to proceed ahead without any impediment, and very soon they arrived at the Matthews clan's conference hall. This was where Xavier had clashed with the First Elder several days ago. The buildings that had been destroyed in that encounter had already been repaired, bearing no signs of the devastation that had occurred just a few days before. Noticing the doubtful look on Xavier's face, the sword discreetly explained through gleam telepathy.
Your mother's rampaged in the Matthews clan a few times in the past, destroying quite a number of buildings each time. For that, the Matthews clan has specially employed a group of landscapers to conduct emergency repairs whenever required.
Hearing that his mother was actually a harbinger of destruction as well, Xavier's face twitched slightly.
Welcoming the return of our deputy clan head and the young prodigy.
As soon as they stepped into the hall, Xavier heard a voice echoing from within. Lifting his head, he saw the elders of the Matthews clan standing within, waiting patiently for their arrival. The sword nodded to acknowledge the greeting before walking straight to the main seat. Under normal circumstances, with Master K standing, he should have been accorded the highest seat in the room. However, his acknowledging Xavier as his senior put the Sword Saint a generation above him, so he could only make do with the seat at the very back. The sword looked at the elders before him and said,
I believe that all of you should have heard by now that Xavier is the young prodigy of our Matthews clan, who went missing 20 years ago. Since he's finally returned to us, I will have to trouble you all to prepare the tributes and make arrangements for the acknowledgement ritual. Tomorrow morning, we'll first pay our respects to the ancestors before holding the inauguration ceremony.
Inauguration ceremony? Clanhead, do you mean to say that you intend to pass down the Clanhead position to the young prodigy tomorrow? Isn't that a little too fast?
The elders were caught off guard by the sudden announcement. With the return of the young prodigy, it was only a matter of time before the sword passed down his position to him. However, this was a little too rushed. Xavier had only just returned to the Matthews clan, so he was unlikely to know anything about the current state of affairs surrounding it. Was he really in a good position to be making the final calls of the Matthews clan? If anything, it seemed like he would only lead the Matthews clan into a spiral of decline. Someone from the crowd suddenly bellowed, "I oppose it." The gazes in the room swiftly turned toward the source of the objection, and following that, First Elder Jeremy stepped out from the crowd. Upon seeing that it was him, the sword frowned. He had ordered Jeremy to return to the Matthews clan to accept his punishment, but who could have thought that he would actually attend this elder conference? "Speak. What's the reason behind your objection?" the sword asked with narrowed eyes. It hadn't been easy for him to get his son back, and he was planning on making up the 20 years of absence to his son. Yet who could have thought that someone would oppose his decision at this point in time? This made him extremely displeased. "Clanhead, I don't mean to be rude, but the position of Clanhead has always been inherited by the offspring with the purest bloodline. Xavier might be your son and the young prodigy of the Matthews clan, but his Matthews clan bloodline is already undetectable. Under such circumstances, I believe that he is unqualified to inherit the position of Clanhead," Jeremy said calmly.
His Matthews clan bloodline is undetectable? Does that mean that the blood of the Matthews clan doesn't run in his veins? First Elder, what does that mean?
The other elders were taken aback by the news. Back then, Evan had moved discreetly under Jeremy's orders to test Xavier's bloodline in the blood reservoir. So, other than the two of them and the Sword Saint, no one else was aware of the matter. "Elder Evan, why don't you report the results of your investigation to everyone here?" Jeremy gestured grandly.
"Yes, First Elder."
Evan walked to the front of the crowd before continuing.
"When Xavier was in our Matthews clan a few days ago, I had a hunch that he could be the young prodigy. So, I secretly took him into the blood reservoir to test his bloodline. However..."
Very soon, Evan went through the details of what he had seen in the blood reservoir.
"So without the Matthews clan bloodline, he cannot even be considered a member of the Matthews clan. How can such a person be our clan head?"
A huge uproar broke out amid the crowd after hearing the ins and outs of the matter. They had tested the bloodline of the young prodigy when he was born, and the sheer purity of his bloodline shocked the entire clan. It was in view of this that they had unanimously nominated him to be their clan head despite his young age. However, when he returned 20 years later, there wasn't the slightest drop of the Matthews clan bloodline in his veins. How could they still accept him as their clan head? The Matthews clan bloodline is the very symbol of authority in our Matthews clan. Since our clan head has already verified the matter, I do not doubt that Xavier is indeed an offspring of our Matthews clan. However, if he has lost his Matthews clan bloodline, I'm afraid that it would be contrary to the teachings of our ancestors to make him our clan head. Jeremy clasped his fist and bowed deeply. I am opposing this for the sake of our Matthews clan. Clan head, I beseech you to reconsider your decision. You. The sword's complexion turned incomparably awful after hearing Jeremy's words. After all the trouble that he had gone through to find his son, he had thought that everything would swiftly fall back into place. Yet who could have thought that Jeremy would be able to stop him so easily? The reason that Jeremy had given was simple but powerful. There was indeed a rule in the Matthews clan's teachings stating that only offspring who had achieved a certain level of purity in their bloodline would be qualified to become the clan head. Considering how his son didn't have the slightest bit of the Matthews clan bloodline running through his veins, there was no legitimacy to him becoming the clan head. What do you propose, then? The sword spat coldly as he stared piercingly at Jeremy. What I propose is very simple. We'll nominate the offspring whose bloodline has reached the mark to become our next official clan head, Jeremy replied with a grand wave of his hand. Even my bloodline hasn't reached the level of purity required to become the clan head. Who else in the clan could possibly have met the mark? The sword narrowed his eyes coldly. It was apparent that Jeremy was intentionally making things difficult for him. He currently possessed the purest bloodline in the Matthews clan, with the exception of his son 20 years ago. But still, he hadn't reached the level of purity required to be inaugurated as a true clan head. Given so, who else could possibly meet the mark? Clearly, Jeremy was cooking up this fuss just to stop Xavier from becoming the next clan head. Clan head, just because your bloodline hasn't reached the required level of purity doesn't mean that no one else's has. I've already found someone in the clan whose bloodline purity reaches the mark, and perhaps far exceeds it even. Jeremy burst into hearty laughter as he raised his hand and gestured, "Come in," following which a figure slowly walked into the hall. I have already tested his bloodline, and I am certain that it meets the mark required to become the true clan head. In fact, in terms of sheer purity, he's on par with even the young prodigy back then. If he isn't qualified to become the clan head, no one else is. Jeremy raised his hand and shrouded the figure with his energy, following which a brilliant burst of light shone from the figure. What formidable purity this is! Everyone in the hall narrowed their eyes in astonishment. Even amid the blinding light, they could feel that the energy harnessed in the other party's bloodline far exceeded theirs, almost like the searing sun. Even the sword couldn't help but frown upon seeing this. He could sense that the other party's bloodline was far stronger than his, such that they weren't even on the same level as one another. His bloodline has exceeded every single one of us here, and I believe none of you should have any doubt that he has already met the mark required to become the clan head. I presume that none of you have any objections to him becoming the clan head then, right? Jeremy gazed at the astounded crowd and laughed triumphantly. But at this moment, Xavier suddenly spoke up. Come here. Upon seeing Xavier interjecting at this crucial moment, Jeremy lashed out furiously. Xavier, you might be the young prodigy, but without the slightest drop of our Matthews clan bloodline in your veins, I'm afraid that you don't have a say here. Our Matthews clan is currently in the midst of nominating our next clan head, so I will have to ask an outsider like you to hold your tongue. But before he could finish his words, the figure who had just walked in hurriedly strode over to Xavier and kneeled on the floor.
Nathaniel pays respect to teacher.
The figure who had just entered the hall was none other than Nathaniel. Indeed, rise. Xavier reached out to touch Nathaniel's head lightly before turning an amused gaze toward Jeremy. With an impassive voice, he asked,
First Elder, can you repeat what you just said? I'm afraid that I didn't hear your words clearly.